Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Now, Miranda, tell me, what is the subject and what is the predicate in this sentence? Come on, you clever girl, you'll do well. Lisa asked the girl, who had been sitting on the table for half an hour and could not make any progress. On the kitchen floor and wall, the afternoon sun was drawing shining, boring squares. It was summer in the midst of that marvelous pairing when the existence of other seasons can be forgotten. The girl was absent-minded, tired. However, with a stepfather like that, it was no wonder the child was nervous all day long. "It's stuffy. I'll open the window," said Lisa, and got up and went to the window. In general, in this one room, where she worked as a tutor, for 3 years already helps the daughter of her best friend with Russian language. It had always been stuffy and dirty and dingy, ever since Miranda Kelly's mom came down with an illness that the doctors had only flailed their arms against, saying to look for money and those who would even take it on. Or better yet, accept it. The case is hopeless. It left the house in a bad way. Lisa and Kelly became friends by chance. They both went to the skating rink one winter, alone, with no idea what to do. What was the right thing to do or how to do it? They went out on the ice, laughing, holding hands, didn't get crucified. Then it was coffee and pies at a little kiosk here at the rink that they got to talking and found out they had a lot in common. Both were fans of old jazz, hated onions. There were larks in every dish and even, it turns out, lived in neighboring yards. But there were some natural and cool differences between them. Lisa was 3 years older than her newly minted 18-year-old friend. Lisa was from a full, one might say, intelligent family with a mom, a math teacher, a grandmother, a vice principal, and a dad, an art history teacher at the university. Kelly stepped into adulthood from an orphanage and had just gotten an apartment. At times, Kelly felt incredibly lonely because of the way some people treated her due to her background, hurtful and offensive inductions. Unfortunately, even Lisa's family found such people, but she stood up to defend her friend with a mountain and said that she had had enough of giving in to her loved ones and agreed to enter the faculty of philology to devote her life to the Russian language, giving up her dream of becoming a tax collector. That's how Lisa finally defended her right to friendship. She, by the way, supported Kelly in the fact that studying for her is a good choice. There would always be a job. The girls kept no secrets from each other, except for one dark, literally life-altering one. Kelly must and after. Then, 9 years ago, there had been a romance in her life as deafeningly exciting as possible for a first love. He was masculine, strong, bold. Absolutely no match for Kelly, according to her best friend. "I'm sorry, but he's not your daddy," Lisa had said bluntly to Lisa that fateful evening when Kelly had been twirling in front of the mirror, fixing her hair and assessing whether she looked good in a little black dress and a string of pearls, albeit artificial, around her neck. "He loves me and I love him," Lisa replied. I rolled my eyes, because this is not an argument for building a serious relationship. Her friend was like a spell. "He's a bad man from a rich family. But that's just a facade. What's he really like? Do you know what people say about him?" Kelly only shrugged her shoulders. She smiled like a fool and kissed her best friend on the cheek, wishing her good luck goodbye. "He's probably going to propose to me tonight." Ran off on a date that destroyed. Because the next morning, Cindy, as her closest contact, got a call from the hospital. Kelly was in intensive care with severe injuries sustained in a mundane accident. The doctor explained to Cindy that her friend had been beaten and thrown full speed out of a car. Serious injuries touched her entire body. And worst of all, her spine had been hit in particular. They said to prepare for the worst, that she'd be crippled. Except Kelly made an amazingly speedy recovery. But they never found her abuser. He managed to get away, literally fled the country. And then it turned out that Kelly was pregnant, and the doctors unanimously said they had to terminate the pregnancy on the background of traumatic injuries can lead to catastrophic consequences. "It's my baby," Kelly replied. When Lisa, along with doctors, came to convince her to choose herself about her health future. "It's a girl, I can feel it. And she's mine, you hear? I'm her mom, and we're going to be okay." And then, after asking to be left with her friend, Kelly forced Lisa to swear that no one would ever know the truth about who the baby's father was. That this is the monster who did this to her, throwing her literally out of her life when she became unwanted. When love was played out, when Kelly was discharged from the hospital, it seemed at first that life was slowly getting back on track. Acquaintances in the shop supported financially. Get well for now. Then, before the birth, still managed to work. And finally, the baby was born. A girl. Lisa asked Kelly to help pick out a name, and they decided she'd be a car. After all, it's an ancient, beautiful, and magical name. Lifting the baby, of course, was very hard. But Kelly was not discouraged. She worked as soon as she could snatch the opportunity of her mother's new everyday schedule. And even when the car turned 4 years old, she met a man named Charles. True, in Lisa's opinion, it was again a bad lot. 10 years older with no living space of his own. Came from a village where the whole family drank. But Kelly said he's a real man who works as a laborer, and the baby needs a father. And then, when it already seemed, well, life is more or less formed, there's nothing to complain about, then suddenly the disease came back. At first it was just back pain. And Kelly thought she'd just broken her back at work. She also cleaned the entrances of the house where she lived. Then her legs started to lose feeling. The doctor said, "What do you want?" Parents after a trauma like that. And they worked hard. And for the last 4 years, Kelly got worse and worse. Now she could barely get out of bed. Cindy, of course, helped as much as she could. But she could see that her friend's life was going badly. And Miranda was a big part of that. Because Charles had lately started drinking beer to begin with, and as if only after work. Then it was replaced by stronger drinks. Lisa even had a fight with him once, sternly demanding that he think about his family. "It's not mine," curved his lips Charles, and piano, and two. But a stranger wanted to call the baby girl something strong, but was afraid. And then alcoholism. Raised a finger aloft. "Shaky hands is also a hereditary disease. That's me. I'm still the man of the house, so you stay out of it. What's she doing here? Although I think she's a stupid girl. Miranda, your wife is wasting your money." "I don't come to you for money," Lisa replied. She was disgusted. This man, he was not worthy of her friend. In general, such a bright, kinder Kelly should not have happened. Lisa, by the way, the truth, did not take money for preparing the little girl for school and all the other additional activities with her persuaded Kelly to accept the help of someone, and was uncomfortable. Close the window. Charles came into the kitchen. "I can't breathe in the apartment. Would you at least mop the floor once in a while?" Lisa replied, "Wash the floors. Are there no women in the house?" He pointed his finger in the direction of Miranda, who was sitting on a chair, waiting in a lump. "You're a little animal, hoping to escape the eye of the hunter. So rag in her teeth, and off you go. In the village at her age, she can do anything." And this. And then the stepfather, drunk again, spit on the floor, and the princess will learn. But all to no avail, waved his hand, and went to his room. By the way, the room was divided into 2 parts of the wives' bodies, and in the second half was kind of a nursery. But Miranda went to bed in the kitchen. There was a little couch here. It was all right. The hostess, not paying attention, stroked the Lisa pupil's head. "Let's get on with it. What are we doing?" "Kara is rolling, sailing fast on the blue sea. And I don't know what the subject is," Miranda whispered, tears in her eyes, afraid of her stepmother. Lisa sighed and looked at the words under the picture below, where the sea creature crocodile was drawn. Yes, things had gotten better with school. But Lisa also remembered very well that when her stepfather had gone to the village for a couple of days, she had made great progress. Apparently, it was just hard to learn in the oppressive atmosphere at home. When class was over, Lisa stopped by to see Kelly for a moment. "You know how she's feeling. Is there anything I can do to help? Why don't you just go ahead and go?" Waving her arms at Charles, who had the news on full volume. He loved watching it. And then he'd go on and on about how wrong the world was. The smart guy's got his life together. Lisa thought in spite and finally left the apartment. "Lisa, when I was crossing the courtyard, heading for my place, I called out, 'Wait,' Lisa, giving my face a friendly expression with a smile. The girl turned around. 'Hello, James, the son of my mom's friend's mom and the entire extended family,' lashing out at my wife. In general, James was a nice guy. They'd known each other for about 100 years. He worked as a construction foreman, had no bad habits, went to the club. To do boxing was set on a family of children. In short, he was perfect, even cute on the face. But to Lisa's taste, he was bland, predictable, too calm. He didn't give her butterflies, as they say, in her stomach. Awe, delight. Nothing like that. They'd already gone on dates, sweetie, to an Italian restaurant. They even kissed once, and it was nothing. But on the other hand, Lisa knew in her mind that family and marriage should be built not on romantic fantasies and passions, but on mutual respect, trust, and the ability to compromise. James asked how she was. Lisa said she was fine. He volunteered to walk her home. We slowed down and talked about everything. James shared his joy. His mother had bought a second plot of land adjacent to her cottage. There was nothing on this plot yet, but the improvement would come. Lisa listened to his plans about what kind of house he would build as a vegetable garden. They will break up to eat their own organic, and almost dressed and then appeared heir, if such a thing is possible. But it turned out to be possible because James suddenly said, "Marry me." Theoretically, Lisa assumed that a marriage proposal was just around the corner, but right now, specifically, she was in shock. She stopped and slammed her eyes shut. "We can apply at the registry office tomorrow. Would you take my hand on probation?" On my James found himself hot and sweating. The guy was worried sick. He had long been in love with Lisa and could not believe that she was about to become his wife. But I don't doubt this development. My mom's cousin's sister is married to a restaurant owner named Jasmine. They've arranged for the banquet to be discounted. I made it sound like one thing. Lisa and James smiled widely. "I'm so happy. Wait for me." Lisa's hand pulled back and really didn't like it. Feeling driven by circumstances. But that's what was happening now, blossoming with her. But I hadn't said yes yet. James was changing before my eyes. His smile was gone. His eyes were so pitiful, like he'd hurt a child. "Well, that is," she bounced heavily, took to adjusting the nervous purse on her shoulders. She needed to move, to do something different. The anxiety was threatening to be overblown. Probably a panic attack. I need to think. That's what usually happens when you get an offer. Apparently James had heard of it too, that women are supposed to be given time to think. "Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow." He exhaled a sigh of relief. She nodded. "Oh, and I still have to go to the market. I will help volunteered as a brave knight to accompany." But Lisa waved her hands. "I'm not going to keep you. I have to go to the market for a long time. And then I have to go to the cosmetics store." She was making it up as she went along. She could barely fight it off. She hurried in the opposite direction of the house, so she lived to tell the tale. Now she had to make a decision. But Lisa suddenly realized she couldn't just say what she wanted, could she? Because, well, I don't love him, she admitted to herself, falling almost to a table in the coffee shop. Laughs and eclairs. 3 pieces tossed to the approaching waitress, barely glancing at the menu. In Lisa's life had so far had only one serious romance with a classmate. But they'd broken up without ever really getting close, because suddenly it was discovered that he was a hunter. Lisa couldn't imagine what it was like to stuff stuffed animals in the apartment. Her husband brought the prey to her head. And then somehow her studies spun and her own life, in which it seemed there was no place for men. She understood the excitement of her parents, They wanted to see their daughter happy, to have grandchildren. But it was also suddenly clear to Lisa that this was a marriage. What if it was a mistake? What if it wasn't always like this? Like her grandmother used to say about her marriage. Lisa happily spooned into the eclairs with fat, creamy chocolate custard. Goodbye diet, but she can afford it. Life is like that. Afterwards, Medovic cakes, Napoleon tiramisu were ordered. Lisa just couldn't stop. Finally, over a glass of milk, she asked for the bill. She reached into her purse for her wallet and found another note in it. She unfolded it and frowned. Handwriting. Miranda's was scrawled with misspellings, but what she read made Lisa cringe, apparently afraid to speak openly. After all, her stepfather was always hanging around the apartment. The little girl decided to entrust everything to paper. The fact that Lisa was shocked by a marriage proposal, made hastily and without romance at all. It all receded into the background because it was urgent to save her friend. Lisa came home and helped her mom cook. Tisha had a lesson with another one of her students. Through the web connection, she remotely set her alarm for 7 o'clock. Just yesterday, Kelly cheerfully said that Charles would leave home early because he wanted to take a quick train ride to his home village and come back in the evening. There was something wrong with the sewage system, and he needed to help his parents. And now Lisa has decided to take advantage of his absence to have a serious conversation. This is what your daughter wrote, handed her friend a note the next day. Came, Miranda opened, walked to the room where Kelly was lying, advanced 100 to the bed, and sat down. What is it? Kelly squinted, reading, then rounded his eyes and shook his head. Already she opened her mouth to say something. But Lisa cut her off. Are you saying the kid's making this up? No, I can understand you wanting to keep your family together. But if that's true, there's nothing left to save. The helpless woman's lips trembled as she lay there. Her eyes filled with tears, because the complaints the little girl was saying to her aunt's tutor were true. Charles, indeed, beat mom at home really no to eat, because Charles' salary primarily on herself spent mostly on alcohol more expensive, because cheap, as everyone was told, liver, daycare. Kelly for a long time strengthened, believed that just this is a difficult period of life. After all, she's completely sick, can't work for her husband. All the household chores have fallen, and since there is no money for a caregiver, I had to take care of her. And this, of course, is not always clean. It's psychologically difficult for a man. But then one day, on a remark that he did not boil porridge for Miranda for breakfast and for lunch, there was no hot dinner either. Charles, hurt to the point of bruising, grabbed his wife by the arm and fucked her. She screamed that he was a man and making money, that he was tired of messing around with both of them. And then it was as if the husband made a cruel discovery to himself. He could behave like that. He could take out his anger and irritation on his helpless wife, who was not going anywhere. But you can't do that, Lisa said, when her friend had finished confessing how they really lived. You have to do something. You have to break up with him. Break up with him. And then what are you gonna do with me? I'm sorry, she added, immediately realizing how unfair it was to be treated so unfairly by a friend who was always there to help. But I'd be lost without him. I wish I was healthy. By the way, is there anything going on with the funds? Lisa asked. It was her idea, by the way, to sell ads to various fundraising charities. Not really, answered Kelly. The amounts needed were astronomical. And not just for one-time treatment, but for major surgery and long-term rehabilitative care. Charles, well, I thought I'd just tell you how thin it was. Charles said that if I went to the hospital, I wouldn't be with Miranda, that he'd put her in an orphanage. He's my husband. Said he had the right. And Kelly cried. Cindy wanted to cry too, but instead she told her friend that please don't scare the baby with tears. She went into the kitchen, looked in the refrigerator. It was empty. Ran to the store, cooked soup, chicken cutlets, and more charlotte with apple and cinnamon was going to. Actually at home to help my parents put up wallpaper. But she called and said she had to leave for one class, and I didn't regret cleaning up a little bit. It was for a good cause. If she'd said it straight out, they'd have grumbled. Lisa fed lunch to her friend Miranda and could finally get on with what she had to do. The thing was that she had only shown Kelly one part of the note, and she had torn off the bottom part because Miranda had written something unimaginable. Lisa talked to her about it quietly after lunch. "Miranda, how do you know about Aunt Redhead?" "See," said the bully. "Daddy goes to their house. See," he says, sneaking around like a thief. The named Rick was indeed known in the neighborhood yards as a dashing, ill-mannered boy from a dysfunctional family, and his mother raised him alone. Lisa decided that she would not say anything about the possible infidelity of her friend's husband. First, we have to make sure it's not a childish fantasy. Strange isn't a mistake. Lisa found Rick suffering. The kid got behind the garages with his buddies, and they set up some kind of headquarters, lured him out, barely swore an oath. That she wasn't some neighbor with a complaint about broken windows. In fact, she's an acquaintance of the family, Miranda. "What do you want?" the teenager asked suspiciously. Lisa told him what she wanted. "Well, he comes by all sorts of things. His mom's expecting him again tonight at 10 o'clock, so you'll probably tell his wife everything as usual." Yeah, sure. But Kelly is very sick, and she can't be worried. So we need to think about how we're going to handle this. You adults always make everything so complicated. You can come back tonight and see for yourself." And he explained where to find their apartment. Said that if you go in from one side, the house, there are small and bushes in the suburbs, all the way around, or could you then literally peek through the window? Lisa only shook her head. A little spy. But she thought the boy's idea was a great one. "Lisa, where do you get to all day long?" From the threshold of the native apartment, her mother swooped down on the girl and made scary eyes. James came in with a portico, said, "Do you have anything important to say for us?" Lisa almost didn't notice. Here came another trouble. She hadn't even answered him yet, and he was about to announce to everyone at the table that they were going to be married. Making again, as she knew how to do, the most welcoming face, Lisa peeked into the kitchen, where they were already packing for 100. Hello. The move flew to the Mariana Trench. Because James didn't come alone, but with his mom. So it wasn't good at all. Lisa glanced at the clock until hour X, when she was to become a bit of a spy. There was still a decent amount of time left. Ducking down the street was unrealistic, weird for the homies, and it would mess up the weather too. So she had to stay. Lisa changed her clothes, washed her hands, sat down at the table, turned on all her eloquence. She tried with all her might to lead the conversation into the wilds, further distant marriages, and the like, and it was working. Then James suddenly caught her hand again and smiled so big that he almost melted like an ice cream cone in the sun from his own happiness. Lisa felt on her back. It's a boom, a panic of goosebumps. I had Kelly forget this phone, made up a lie on the fly, and pleaded to no one in particular that my phone her ringtone, which all the household knew would not ring inappropriately. Lisa now. James reached for her, but she had already jumped up and gone into the other room. She got ready to go out as quickly as ever, without even waiting for the elevator. Because the drive seemed to be boiling in her blood, she ran down from the 10th floor on foot, jumping over the steps in places. The rain had stopped, but the wind was chopping viciously, sharp with damp gusts. Lisa framed her face against it with a squeeze. How good is she? She'd think about marriage. James wasn't a bad guy after all. She'd be like a stone wall behind him. Maybe it's his love that'll keep the marriage together for life and never cheat, never hurt. And the fact that she doesn't love. Maybe that's nothing to married life. Immersed in contradictory thoughts to herself, Lisa reached the right place. She pulled out her phone, turned on the video recording, and quietly walked up to class. The windows did indeed appear to be low, and the fact that there was a vent open allowed her to hear what was being talked about in the room. There was a red-haired woman, the mother of Vitya and Charles. They were sitting at the table and drinking tea, talking. And what Lisa heard came as a shock. It turned out that Charles had been hoping that Kelly would get worse soon. And then, citing the fact that he couldn't provide her with proper care, he was going to put her in some boarding school. What a bastard. Lisa, gritting her teeth. Charles was also rudely dismissive of his stepdaughter. And he was going to take the kid somewhere too. Boarding school. So Charles wanted to become the sole tenant and outright landlord. Too bad there's no way to sell it. But maybe I'll think of something, as the drinking buddy added at the end of his revelation. Heard and seen and captured, but on the camera was enough. Lisa quietly descended the hillside, got out of the bushes. It turned out to be a briar bush, clinging mercilessly to her new dress. What kind of day is this? The girl was indignant, assessing the damage to her clothes, but then laughed nervously at Kelly and her problems. That's who's in real trouble. And the main thing is not clear what to do, how to help. Lisa came home feeling very upset. It took you so long to get the phone. Yeah, she met her mother again on the doorstep. The apartment was quiet. James, my daughter, what are you doing? What the hell is that? What's the state of your clothes? Said the parent, seeing the state of your clothes. Just a little walk in the park, and got caught up. But don't start with James. I'll do the talking. Why did he leave? He didn't want to leave. He wanted to wait for you, but Clara said they had to go. Holly, don't make him angry. The mom-to-be also told me what he said. So it's clear that you're getting married. Who is clear? Give all you, daughter. Didn't you realize James, your husband? Lisa rolled her eyes. Now Mom sounded like some kind of educated, cultured grandmother. So let's drop this conversation. After all, he's the one who wants to marry me, right? So the decision to make me not too polite, but from the bottom of my heart, replied Lisa. We sighed heavily and shook our heads, but did not say anything more on the subject. We do the dishes, though. It's your turn. Lisa agreed with that. Hands on something while your head is thinking. What's the next step? It turned out to be very useful and sedative for the nervous system the next morning. Lisa wasn't ready to talk to her friend, but she just couldn't find the right words and couldn't imagine how Kelly would live with that awful truth. And if you tell Charles, how will he behave then? Lisa decided to take some more time to prepare some plan. She started to get ready for the next student's class. In general, Lisa always crossed the road strictly on the green and on the zebra. But this time, the bus was delayed because of a breakdown on the route. The students' parents were the kind of people who would change one little thing. Lisa was in a hurry and decided that if she ignored the rules carefully, nothing would happen. And so even though the light was red, she dashed across the street. She won a minute there. She'll be on time. But it didn't work out. And to blame for everything was a thin, high heel of the new torpedo, which got stuck in the grate, literally half a meter from the sidewalk. Lisa started twitching her foot, then turned around at the shrill signal. Eyes widened as a huge black SUV sped straight toward her. She had time to think she could decipher the shoes and free herself. Also had time to think there was no time for that. I squeezed my eyes shut, having time to think one more thought, that it seemed that life should be all flashing before my eyes at such a moment, and she was being silly. And then there was a squeal of brakes. The SUV stopped lightly, poking the girl's blunt nose literally in her legs. Just a little more, and the irreparable happened. Lisa cautiously opened her eyes. Are you sick of living? And immediately met her gaze with the fury of the driver's eyes. Oh, said the girl to herself. When the big man in a leather jacket loomed over her, he had powerful square jaws, but with Rybinskaya unreal blue eyes. Black hair, raised in a fashionable in the manner of the 60s hairstyle up. Stupid, sharp in the face, wearing the fresh copper breath. Lisa felt some strange thrills and goosebumps walk down her back at the proximity of that word. Exactly the Viking of the giant. Then suddenly recognition came. She'd only seen the man who'd broken her friend's life once. But it was that face that was memorized, and now it was right above her. Lisa acted as if on instinct. Her hand flew upward and clashed ringingly. The man pranced. She touched herself on the cheek, then looked down at her palm in surprise. Right there could show in ink the explanation of the deed, almost knocked down by him to the stranger. "Scoundrel!" I shouted at him and wanted to come at him with my fists and with my handbag, but I forgot that I was stuck, aghast, and awkwardly began to fall. He picked me up. He held her, naturally, in his arms, so she forgot how to breathe. "Young lady, calm down. I'm sorry. Are you okay? Are you in pain?" "Yes, it's my fault. But let's not fight. She's read herself. Why'd you run?" I was just a stream of words, and she looked with all her eyes and did not understand why it is so difficult to curse this monster on the spot. "Let me go," she whispered, and he gently let her go. Crouched down, grabbing her leg, I deftly turned Kova's leg, so that the heel slipped out of the bars. I had to lean on the man's shoulders to keep my balance. I hate you," I said coldly, as frozen by the word when he took the man for margarine, but then suddenly grinned unkindly too. "For running the red light yourself, you fool. No, you're not. You ruined my friend's whole life. And Lisa, always so strong, who never went out of her way for a word, was suddenly torn. You asshole, you're her. She had a baby girl. You're finished. We're gonna get you for what you did." And then she went on to say everything she thought. "Okay, stop. Shut up. You either ordered me to or you asked me to. I didn't do anything, Kelly, because my name is Rick, and you're talking about Mason. That's my brother." "What brother? You look just like him, don't you?" "Well, it's not my fault, we're twins." Lisa couldn't believe it. The man walked back to the car, came over, and held out his passport again. "See, I have a different name." Lisa stood frowning, trying to put this puzzle together. She remembered. Kelly had actually said that her boyfriend had a twin brother, only they didn't get along. "I'm sorry," sighed convulsively and wrapped her arms around herself. "I was wrong. Yeah, but it's been worse. A brother's legacy." The sky, meanwhile, had clouds somewhere waving in the sky and asphalt. Then the first drops. "All right, give me a minute. I'll park properly and we'll talk about it. There's a cafe over there," waving at the sign. "Will you tell me what happened there? 'Cause I didn't get it." Lisa agreed. They went in, sat down at a table. They ordered a cup of this flavorful drink. But Lisa didn't even touch her cappuccino. She stared intently at the man across the table. Definitely not. Rick rolled his eyes. How else to prove it? "No, I'm not Mason. He is. He's dead." "What? The car accident 9 years ago?" "He was in China then and decided to race on the track for a bet." "If that's... well, that's the case. He was a real piece of work, but he was a brother." "So what happened? You said he had a kid." "Yes." Nodding, Lisa finally sipped her coffee and told the short story of how Kelly had fallen into a vicious affair, how she barely survived, and had decided to keep the baby at the cost of her own health. About how she was suffering now. Rick listened attentively, only occasionally asked short questions. "I don't know anything about it," he replied. And for some reason Lisa believed him. "I was in New York at the time, and I was still in school. Then I was told that Mason had gotten into some kind of trouble and had left the country. They said he'd given up everything. I came back 2 years after that. My father handed me the business. That's how she's been getting out all these years. I had a niece living in the neighborhood, and I didn't know it." So slammed his palm on the table. "So it was just fate that brought us together. I was supposed to leave for Italy tomorrow, but it turns out I'll have to stay late. Business can wait." Or she said no. "So, what are we gonna do?" I don't know," Lisa shrugged. "What do you mean you don't know?" "Well, you can't leave it like that. It's complicated." The girl already regretted her frankness. After all, this Rick, though he made a nice first impression, was still in the same family. And if even half of the rumors about them were true, they were clearly not people who could be trusted. Lisa suddenly thought about the fact that maybe it was not favorable for them to have a woman who had a child with such a person. In case they, well, I mean Rick's relatives would take the whole story hostilely. Theoretically, if Kelly had a different temperament, she could try to get them to support her and her child, all be born out of wedlock. In fact, from what Lisa knew of the Smith family, they didn't give a damn about their personal reputations. But still, maybe it wasn't for nothing that her friend begged her to keep Miranda's origins a secret. What's the big deal? Rick smirked and leaned back in his chair. We moved the child's mother to us, and that's it. Where to us? Lisa asked cautiously. Well, home. They can't go on living unsupervised with Charles. Rick looked at her strangely. It's like blood. No. What are you talking about? Kelly's not a thing to be taken and transferred. She didn't want anyone to know about it at all, much less Smith, she added quietly. Now Cindy was beginning to think she had missed something in her perception of Rick. There was something dangerous about him, something that just made her instincts scream. Run. I have to talk to her. Explain that I met you. Tell her you're offering to help, and that's the way it's going to be. Finished decisively and stopped in passing. The waiter slid in with a tray, asking for the bill. My treat. Threw carelessly Rick, and it didn't escape the girl that he was literally considering her without any shyness. Thank you. But I'm so not used to the city, dropped her chin and left the bills for coffee, plus the waiter for tea. And for nothing. It's as if the man is deliberately provoking intimacy. A girl this pretty shouldn't. And this is where you're overstepping your bounds. Lisa nervously put on a jacket, tangled in the sleeves, sagged under the nose. That's it. I'll call you when I'm going to go out. Did you forget your phone? Rick stopped her with a sneer, and there it was. I wanted to slap him again, but I had to go back and really exchange numbers. When the girl left, the lecturer looked thoughtfully out of the window for a few minutes. Then he dialed the number of the man who had repeatedly helped him out of the most difficult and sometimes risky situations. Boris, are you free? You know, we have a problem. Lisa, of course, was late for class and had to cancel it altogether. And the students' parents said that in principle such a sluggish tutor could not teach anything worthwhile, and so they no longer needed Lisa's services. Before the next lesson, there was about 4 o'clock to eat, take a nap, and go home. Lisa had been chronically sleep-deprived the last few days. It was definitely not enough considering the traffic jams on the roads. So we had to pass the time at the mall. And then, when I circled it for the 3rd time at the city library, where Lisa checked out the first book she could find, it turned out to be a novel. A paperback about a duke and an innocent waif. She opened it to find she didn't want to read it, and she plunged into her thoughts. What did she know about these Smiths? Nothing she'd deliberately learned about them. Well, she'd heard about them here and there. Seems they owned a few businesses in the area, and they were rich in the country, except that Jacob, the father of the family, was said to have made his fortune in the Nenities in a far from honest way. And Noah had raised his son alone. At least Noah had raised him abominably. Or so Lisa thought. Evil in a person can initially exist. No matter how you raise him, there was more. So it was known that Smith owned some business abroad. In Italy, the same Noah was involved in a dirty story, it seems, connected with smuggling something there. He shrugged. Lisa glanced at her watch. Well, it was time. We can go to the student. And for the nuances of electively punctuation marks, forget all about it. The next day, having gotten a moment when Charles wasn't home, he left for work. Lisa stopped by her friend's house, determined to have a conversation. The car, naturally, to protect children's ears from the serious subject, was sat down to watch cartoons, and to be safe, was provided with a bowl of cookies and a cup of cocoa. Kelly, as expected, took everything hard. It cost Lisa a lot of work to calm her friend down and tell her to hang in there. When it was revealed that her first love and abuser had died, Lisa told a small lie because she didn't believe it herself, and tried to convince her friend that if the man knew he had a daughter, He would surely repent and realize what a horrible person he was. Lisa said all this to bring the conversation to the next topic: the offered help from Rick. At first, Kelly had desperately rejected her and didn't need anything. Lisa had to be cruel and say straight up, well, what don't you need? Health to be. Stop it all, I can't do this to you anymore. You're Charles. He's not a husband. He's just as nasty as Mason. No, don't say that. It was Kelly first. But Lisa just handed her the phone and showed her the secretly recorded tape. Then she hugged her tightly and looked into her eyes and told her to hold on, because she couldn't do otherwise, and she couldn't act inconsiderately either. It was therefore in no way possible to tell Charles that his evil plans were already known to everyone. The wise thing to do would be to lay low, to see what use could be made of Smith. Yes, it is Mason who has ruined your life, but my opinion will not change. Help should and can be accepted at least as compensation, including moral compensation. It just so happens, girlfriend, that you have to choose between two evils. Think about your daughter. You'll get back on your feet. No one is forcing you to be friends with these wolves. Lisa smiled slyly. I'm just taking advantage of the help. And then goodbye. You'll live independently with your daughter without any idiots. That was the end of their decision. Going out to her friend's house, Lisa, taking advantage of the fact that it was a day off, went to the beauty salon still a week ago signed up, decided to change the brown in hair color, and hair by a fashionable coloring called California Appellation, with which hair seemed as if in the burnt sun, but looked beautiful. On the way, Rick called, saying they needed to meet and talk. It was agreed that he would drive up to the park. The weather was beautiful. We could talk there too. It looks good on you. So, first, said Rick, when she got to the appointed time and answered and thought she really shouldn't care what this guy thought about her altered style. They walked the field of the park, and Lisa relayed, naturally, only partially the outcome of her conversation with her friend. Rick said that it was not a problem to find the money, and moreover that doctors could get it here even abroad. You don't have to go far, Lisa said. He shrugged. And then the topic turned to her own person, strangely unnoticed. Cindy told him who she was, what she did for a living. Cindy realized that this was not the point of the conversation. She was embarrassed, angry at Rick because he'd started it first. Lisa, hello. It was James' voice, the groom, chosen unanimously by all the family except the bride. He had crept up unnoticed, literally ducked out from behind the bushes, and now looked confused. Somehow he reminded me of Owl, good-natured, and a little clumsy. Who's that acquaintance of yours? Name's Rick, and this is James. He's a friend of mine. She answered, but averted her gaze because she couldn't bring herself to say it. As everyone said, her fiancé can't reach you, gently rebuked James. My mom is asking for you. Hi to her. Lisa bent over, picking a gray dandelion off the ground. Why aren't you getting a haircut? Mom always said hair is long. It's your jewelry. You know it's my hair, and I do what I want with it. What about you? Did you go outside with your mom? I asked permission to go for a walk. She was being snide. I'm sick of it. It's all about your mom. Everything has an opinion. I'm done. She tossed the dandelion to the ground and pushed it on top of him. Rick, on the other hand, completely unashamed, smirked, almost insulted. Yeah, boy run. Who are you anyway? James, I've never seen Lisa so annoyed before. Why are you even bothering with the bride? What about the bride? Rick and bent over, struggling, and suddenly caught Lisa's hand up to her lips and kissed her gallantly, but with a frank and predatory look in his eyes. Accept my congratulations. Lisa was at first dumbfounded. Goosebumps danced down her back. Then her cheeks flared up, and she practically shouted, I have not yet answered whether I agree, and leave me alone. Both turned and ran out of the park. Lisa, James followed, but Rick stopped him by the shoulder. Caught, she wants to be alone. Don't you get it? You've never been in a fight in your life, James, but now you want to. He didn't like this familiarity with Lisa that he hadn't seen before. He didn't like the way he kissed the girl's hand and the way she looked at him. He felt kind of uneasy and uncomfortable in general. Stay away from her, Kino as menacingly as possible, and walked out of the park as well. Rick grinned. Just the last thing he wasn't going to do by any means. Lisa was very interesting to him, and now not just as the girlfriend of his big, sudden problem. However, he did not doubt that this problem was solvable, because so far, whatever happened to the Smith family in the end, in one way or another, with greater or lesser losses, and not at all on their part, but everything was solved. Literally, the next day Rick showed up at Kelly's house. Again, they decided together that the most favorable contact, so to speak, was to begin. If Charles would not be around, and so it turned out, he was at work. Rick came with a bouquet of flowers, but after their meeting, Kelly asked Lisa to take Lisa with her, because how could she explain their appearance to Charles? Kelly had wanted to cancel the meeting the day before, to give up everything altogether and not understand how, but to deal with everything on her own. But the case was such that it became clear without the suddenly appeared, like an oasis in front of the wandering in the desert support Rick cannot do without. The thing was, Charles came home drunk. He said he had been reprimanded at work and might be fired altogether. Kelly asked her husband to stay put as best he could. After all, the end of summer was coming and Miranda had to go to school, and nothing had been packed or bought for her yet. But Charles angrily replied that he's the man of the family and he'll decide everything himself. He added that kids are so spoiled nowadays that they can still buy notebooks, all the uniforms. A new backpack is a pampering and a fool's errand. Then he said it quietly, apparently thinking he wouldn't hear. His wife added that he was tired of raising someone else's girl, but he didn't stop there. In the evening, Miranda asked if he would buy yogurt for her. Charles yelled at the girl that they would put her on bread and water, and then she would know how to appreciate a piece and stop whining. That's why Rick Kelly was fishing out of greed. First, I made arrangements with a local clinic. There are some very good specialists here in town. They work miracles, by the way. Well, if you don't mind, you can come in tomorrow for a checkup. Kelly was so quick to marvel. Well, money opens different doors, Rick shrugged. But I need to talk to Sophia. She's our neighbor. She looks after Miranda sometimes. Lisa nodded. I'd look out for tomorrow myself. I have 2 classes. An option, of course, but I can offer babysitting services. No, come on, what are you? That's too much. Kelly objected. And then it's a stranger. And the neighbor, do you know her well? But that's different, Kelly replied. She realized that in her situation such an unexpected care and warning from Rick was a real rescue. But on the other hand, she was uncomfortable taking all this help in an unsettling way. When Rick left, Kelly talked to her friend some more and enlisted her support in breaking the news to Charles. And we decided, by the way, to say that it wasn't a very distant acquaintance who was helping. We moved the conversation to the next day in the morning, because then we have to go to work again. And if we talked in the evening, he would have plenty of time to object, express his opinion, or even make a scandal. Fortunately, Charles only listened and did not even say anything. He waved his hand at the useless, in his opinion, the idea of treatment, and went to work. There again, there was a shortage of goods, and the bosses were looking for someone to blame. The examination took a long time. Kelly thought that she would have to wait several days for answers, but to her surprise, the head doctor of the clinic immediately gave his prognosis that restoration of normal body condition was possible if treatment was started soon. Do not worry about the operation, assured the patient. We have everything to conduct it at the level of the best clinics in America and Europe. Now we need to do some additional tests, and we can set a date. I think, taking into account everything plus the rehabilitation period, by the new year, you will already be able to try to make your first step. Really? Kelly marveled. Tears came to her eyes. When did she ever imagine she could be healthy? Going for walks with her daughter. Then one day, as she dreamed, even go to the sea with her and splash on the waves. She immediately pulled herself together. The sea is far away. The main thing is just to get healthy. Lisa's thoughts in the last few days were occupied with the fate of her friend. There was almost no time for herself. However, it did not care much. Everything in the girl's life had long been subordinated to the usual routine. Classes with students, a little fitness, watching her favorite TV series, plus revision and above, and also household chores. What kind of personal life is there? Even if the relatives seem intent on getting you married as soon as possible. AP, are men in short supply? Lisa asked, carefully, without rushing. Are you molding another jam and cottage cheese? On the day of their big molding, the family gathered at the table and did not do without the topic that unnerves Lisa. No, of course not. It's just that, Mom, and I think James would be a good husband for you. And what I think is of any interest to anyone at all. I'm not arguing. James is a great guy and really would only make a good husband for someone else, I guess. Why? Why don't you like him? Lisa's mom backed up her dad. Well, there's just no spark, the girl answered honestly. Bah, granddaughter shook her grandmother's head. A spark is dangerous. It happens, but how can a fire happen? Lisa froze, noticed that the dress wet hibernation bored and dumplings to mold. And about the groom to talk about everything. I've had enough of half-finished products, said, getting up and growing palms. I'm gonna go see Kelly. Will you do something with her? A grown married woman. Mom was outraged. Age and marital status are no barrier to friendship, shouted Lisa, already out of the bath. To wash her hands was the way to go. But in reality, Lisa didn't go to her friend's house, but to a completely different address. And she decided to do it without warning, because she wanted to see in person and find out where her friend was theoretically going to live. The fact that it would be better to move out of the house where the husband aggressively cheats under the nose of his wife and is up to no good was no longer in doubt. Let me in to see Rick Smith. Can you tell me Lisa's name? Businesslike reported into the intercom outside the mansion, located in a picturesque, ecologically clean neighborhood of the city. But I guessed right. The gate was opened by a guard who was very suitable to play bulldogs in the play, because he was very solid and scowling with an expression on his face. After greeting the unexpected guest, the guard led her to the house. Lisa noted approvingly the small manicured garden outside and the stylishly, but not insanely golden, as in the homes of some rich people, as she'd seen on the shows, the furnishings inside. Hello. Suddenly, a melodious girlish voice sounded, and a pretty blonde girl of about 20 years old came out into the hallway to Cindy and the guard. She was dressed in a scarlet mini dress. Hello, Lisa answered and wondered who it was. Rick had said that her father and his second wife were the same age. We maid was not a good-looking woman either, so there's only one possibility. It's Rick's girlfriend. Well, that's expected. So Lisa, no one talks about you and this Kelly. I'm glad you came. I was thinking of coming to you guys for the blonde's territory. Why would you come? To meet a relative and her best friend. Too naive for Rick's girlfriend, the blonde replied. Oh, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Clara. Liam, she addressed the guard. You're free to go. And turned to the guests again. Come on, Rick in the backyard. Cindy, the blonde, didn't like the overly colorful name. What a lovely name, too. Thought she'd gone. What I was wearing to make dumplings. And now, as it is uncomfortable for knitwear on the dress, sweater with stretched into shorts, and it's all for nothing. And what she honest person to be embarrassed in the company of these measures to think she did not have time. Because, having passed through several rooms, she went out to the backyard and found herself in a small cozy garden, in the center of which in a small corral stood a horse of fantastic golden color. And beside him on his knees Rick, he was examining the animal's leg and speaking to it affectionately. I didn't think these ILs could be like that. He rebelled repeatedly. That's it. It won't hurt now. You'll stand quietly. Almost everything is already animal doctor. The blonde in red called out to him and waved his hand. You've got a visitor here, actually. Rick stood up. He looked imposing. It was the first time Lisa had seen him without his jacket. For the warm weather, the man in jeans wore a simple black t-shirt, emphasizing all the muscles of his torso and arms. Hi. He smiled at Lisa and said not expected, but glad. What are you doing here? Yes, here is thinking about the proposal to change the place of residence and wanted to see what you can offer my friend. She answered. It is important. And the same thing became as mixed. Here are a dozen more of these options to choose from. So that's great. Clara clapped his hands. Don't doubt it. My brother will take care of your friend and me. Anyway, it's all terrible. I sighed. You've got to move on. Kelly and daughter certainly deserve the best. Brother. Lisa gasped. You're his sister. Yeah. What did you think? He just didn't say he had a sister. But just a sister. That's my brother. The one who's a bun and sings the female gender. So I'm going to go carefully. I've got things to do. She winked at Lisa. So you are not only a millionaire, a businessman, a sportsman, but you also deal with horses? Asked Lisa, looking around at everything but the man's definitions. I'm not an athlete, just good genetics, replied Rick, and pulled out of his jeans pocket apple split in half. One part he handed to the girl you can treat at once. She loves it. Well, if so, taking the juicy fruit, stretched out carefully, in the palm of her hand, and awed when the horse picked up the treat with soft, velvet lips. What had happened to her? She hit a piece of iron sticking out of the ground. It was my fault. I should have been more careful where I was going, but she's fine now. Actually, she's an old lady, but as you can see, she's in good shape, my first and only horse. He stroked the animal's neck. My father told my brother and me that there are 2 gifts for New Year's Eve, a horse and a car. Mason chose the second one. I got one, and then their fingers met on silkwood, and it felt like a tiny bolt of lightning struck. Lisa took her hand away and stared down at the toes of her shoes in embarrassment. I actually came here to talk about Kelly. Since you're offering your patronage, it seems silly to turn it down. You don't think Kelly's stupid at all. It's just everything that's happened. Everything that's happened in the last few years. It's really affected her, and I don't want to. I can't let her make the wrong decision because of me. I understand. So you're sort of her representative. All right, Mr. Representative. Ask questions, make terms, we'll negotiate. It was said lightly, jokingly even. But Lisa knew the conversation was going to be serious. Kelly had come to terms with her position over the years. And if in nature there were some stages, which, according to the theory of many psychologists, a person who got into a difficult, nightmarish life situation should go through, she had overcome them in a flash, quickly, being on humility. It wasn't the kind of resignation that seemed to make the world seem black and white, and you didn't care about anything or anyone. Kelly simply decided to let go of the past, not to let it bother her anymore, and to focus on the only and truly important thing, the baby. It was her daughter that was the motivation to get her health back and work harder. It was Miranda who kept the discouragement at bay. True, now it was also necessary to recognize names in great and better motives. Kelly had made many mistakes, and chief among them was her marriage to Charles. Now, after a long time, she realized that she married him out of desperation, because it seemed, well, who else needs her? Orphanage without education of the highest with a child in her arms, and even sick. So she took Charles as a savior, and all his shortcomings from stinginess to neglect, sometimes even contemptuous rudeness to himself, passed by. I thought if it wasn't too bad, it would do. It won't get any worse. But it turned out it could be worse. And now Kelly was just scared. For her daughter. And a little bit for herself. But that fear had only possessed her in the past few days. And now, when a man appeared in her life, outwardly a point of support, a copy of the one who ruined her life in character and intentions, It seems his exact opposite. Now the fear has receded. It was replaced by hope that there is justice in the world. No, Kelly did not expect any fantastic gifts from fate for what she had suffered in the past, but she was timidly hoping that things would just work out so that she could be a healthy mom to her daughter, that they could make a life for themselves. A peace in the world. Kelly thought that apparently the white streak had begun when Lisa came to her and told her about being at the Smith house, talked to Rick about everything. Also met his sister, and she seems like a really nice girl. Kelly, however, remembering how Charles had argued again in the morning, that with the needs of an invalid's wife, you'd have to spend your whole life on medication. I agreed that it was better for her to move out. So we're packing. I'll call Rick and have him pick it up. So Charles is already at work until tonight, right? Lisa was a little confused that they weren't moving out, but rather running away. But it was the only option since she didn't want any scandal at all. And how adequate is Charles? I didn't want to find out in practice. Where are we going? Miranda asked, excitedly, watching Aunt Lisa hurriedly putting all her small belongings into a travel bag. The girl stood nearby, hugging a plush white snow bear with a pink bow around its neck. It had been a gift from Rick, to visit Mommy's friends. Explain to Lisa what would basically even be true. Why won't he come with us? Gingerly asked the girl, and in front of her eyes just blossomed when she found out that he wasn't. There are horses there, Lisa said. Rick will probably let you ride it. They even have a garden with flowers. How am I gonna get to school? I only know how to cross one street. Suddenly I remembered the girl's upcoming schooling. They'll probably drive you by car, or you'll just go to another school. We'll think of something. You'll need all the toys for sure, asked Lisa with a doomed, wistful network, looking at the shelves, filled with all sorts of stuff, and even in the drawer of toys was piled. Much needed and books needed. And the lamp poked the marketeer with its finger. Rick of the month. It's all clear with you, sighed Miranda. Lisa shook her head and went to find some boxes to pack it all properly. Charles had no intuition. It just happened to be that day, and got off work early. Where do you think you're going? He realized his wife wasn't going to the clinic with her daughter and so much stuff. But what pissed Charles off the most was that Kelly was being held in his arms by some stranger. I don't care if the wife was singing about people she knew, but that's not the point. It's a stranger being held by some stranger. It wouldn't even be jealousy anymore. It would be creative anger. Charles, I need treatment. It was uncomfortable to speak in that position. Kelly thought that her crutches had already been put away in the parlor. In fact, Rick was going to put her there. But Charles, what a bad time to show up. It would have been better if they'd just explained everything to him on the phone. I'll stay at a friend's house for a while. It'll be better for you. I won't trouble Galia, so I'm working. What did she think? Confused with him, already calmed down. Your wife is in good hands, said Rick, and he sent a smile that made her even angrier. But he also gave me the look that said to stay out of it. It's dangerous. There were a few neighbors nearby, and they were naturally interested in what was going on. Come on, you guys, calm down. Lisa Kelly is an adult and can decide where she wants to live. Where's the baby going? I'm not letting my daughter in. Clinging to the possibility of control. Charles. And you adopted her? Rick suddenly asked. Who are you? I choked with indignation. Charles. I ask you again. Did you adopt the girl? No, but there's no need to get involved. Your voice is clearly not decisive with a smirk. Rick is as easy as the market and careful to knit porcelain. Set Kelly up in the auto shop, especially after the fact that on the apartment of his wife opened his mouth and mistress's floors below, said Charles added. And without saying anything else, he got into the driver's seat. Lisa and Miranda were already in the cabin, the former in the front passenger seat, the latter next to her mother in the back. The neighbors had heard everything, and now they were so friendly they were rolling over on Charles. He's very brave. He suddenly felt more humiliated and insulted than ever before. You shouldn't have said that, Lisa said. You have to put them in their place. Otherwise, they become greyhounds, Rick replied. But he's my husband, said Kelly. We have to call him right away. What about me? What have you done? She continued indignantly. I'm sorry, it's none of your business. Miranda belongs to our K. Smith family, which means her family. And especially whatever happens to her mother is our business. Calmly, but in a matter-of-fact voice, Rick said, Did you make the right decision in agreeing to your husband moving in? I admit that this man may have positive qualities, but I admit it is purely out of respect for you. But he's clearly not the best company. Now, when you need to get back on your feet. Upon arriving at the mansion, Rick let Kelly take a few steps on her own. But then, seeing how hard it was for her, he told her to conserve her strength and picked her up in his arms again. Lisa walked from the summer, Miranda with her tail on her. She greeted the new arrivals with a brightly colored welcome home banner in the hallway and tossed confetti in the air. Lisa thought it was too much, but Kelly, which rarely happened to her, smiled, and the familiarity of Rick's sister in general was clearly something she enjoyed. The luggage from the car was immediately taken up by one man, Timer, who was introduced as someone like a butler and someone to go to for anything. It also turned out that there was a scary maid Tatiana in the house. The two youngest are Christina and Kathy. There are 3 rooms prepared for Kelly. 1 bedroom for her, a second for Miranda, and an even larger room on the semblance of a hall. And they were all adjoining. Whatever you need, just say the servants are warned that you are our queen, smiled Rick as he lowered Kelly onto the couch in the living room. Thank you. Embarrassed, she replied back. I'll try not to give him too much trouble. Since when did caring become that name? How about we switch to you? And getting consent, he continued, I just want to make your stay and Miranda's too most comfortable. And my father agrees with me completely. Lisa, does Uncle Rick have a wife? Asked a question out of the blue, Miranda asked, when Lisa took the girl from the living room show her room. Here, by the way, was there anything to be surprised about? Everything was decorated in white sky blue and pink colors. The crib was not simple, but in the form of a carriage with golden wheels, with a transparent floor and funny plush unicorn. God, Miranda, as she saw all this splendor, lived to squeal with a squeal of amazement, lost the gift of speech. And then she asked this weird question. Well, I guess not. Why are you asking a little girl? Just like that, the girl answered and ran off to look at the room. In general, it would be possible to praise Rick, of course, for being so prepared for the arrival of the little girl. But on the other hand, it was too much of a fortune to spend, and all for the reason that you were blazing with kindred feelings for your suddenly acquired kinsman. It seemed strange to Lisa. Not that she didn't believe in people's kindness, but it was alarming. Finally, when she helped her friend get settled in her new place and questioned her in detail about everything about the treatment she had planned for the near future, Lisa was able to leave the Smith home to return to her own place. She had a lot of classes waiting for her with her students. She also had to figure something out with James. The phone was ringing off the hook with his phone calls. When Kelly woke up the next morning, she didn't immediately realize where she was. And when she remembered, she lay there for a few minutes just watching the sunbeam on the wall as it froze and took in the new and amazingly prosperous reality. It was hard to believe that now she had been given the opportunity to live in comfort, to be cared for. Rick had been given the opportunity to choose a few professional dialogue, that society that would be most suitable, and Kelly. Oh, it was a difficult choice, and in general it was kind of timid to use everything that this person was ready to give. But one could not say that about Miranda. My daughter was delighted with her new life. She liked that Rick really let her ride the horse. Naturally, the step he led the mare under the reins, and liked the room where she felt like a little princess, and the fact that you could get at least pancakes, soft cream waffles, or cheesecakes for breakfast. You're spoiling her for me. Kelly shook her head. She and Rick were sitting in the garden. He had suggested tea on such a warm and bright day outdoors. On the table, in addition to everything for tea, there were also papers from the clinic. One had to familiarize oneself with the proposed treatment package. "I think we agreed on you," smiled Rick. He looked at the young woman so intently that she was embarrassed. "Yes, of course, she'll be so amused. Is it the least I can do? But you don't have to." "You're wrong. You know, I just believe in fate, that many things in our lives happen for a reason. And so far, that belief hasn't failed me," Kelly, unexpectedly. "So, Nolan took her hand. "Yeah, he's touched her before. And that's when you have her in your arms. But it was different now. I will do anything to earn your trust and forgiveness for what my brother did. You're not responsible for him." I opened my eyes and was struck by how strangely my own heart froze for a moment. Such an amazing feeling that hadn't happened in a long time. It had never been with Charles, and I wanted it to happen again. But then there's the Scarecrow. "I'm glad you can see me as a different person. And yet we're family, and I want to be there for you when you take your first steps, when you're healthy." Kelly smiled and turned away, pretending to regard the late cello picking nectar from the purple rose. The next few weeks merged into one unbearably long time, because agonizing despite all the doctor's favorable prognosis. The unknown. Kelly, although she wished more than anything to become healthy, was very tired of examinations gathered on uncomplicated terms. I was worried that she'd have to bear all these changes for her daughter. Wouldn't she be worse off in her new home? No, it was impossible to complain about the way they were treated. They seemed to accept their arrival. There was Rick, his sister, and the servants. It's strange having servants at all. They seemed to take it naturally, as if it was meant to be. But still, now Miranda was in an unfamiliar environment and couldn't even play with her old friends. And of course, Kelly thought about what it would be like when it was over. After all, it was impossible that fate smiled so much, that once and for all. And that meant that she would probably have to get better and go back to her usual life. It will be possible to divorce Charles, and there was no doubt about it. It's gonna be long and hard. As for Rick's sister, she turned out just fine. And as shameful as it was to admit it, it was kind of a pushover. Kelly Slaga became a friend. They became close, especially since Kelly was fascinated by what Slaga was doing. In general, my dad wanted me to become a lawyer and not a fashion designer, the girl shared. On this cloudy day, Kelly was at her room, which is actually Led, who decided creative mess, more like a creative studio. The subject matter, however, was matter of fact. Clara was twirling around a mannequin with a crackle of fabric, figuring out, as it were, in whose zeal to copy the material on the dress. Kelly sat next to her in the gurney chair she trusted. It doesn't take long to get used to it. But I'm stubborn. I said I'd run away from home if I didn't, according to me, continued the girl. At this, Kelly shook her head boldly. She personally could not imagine how it is so generally possible to communicate with relatives, if in general you have a good relationship with them. She herself had always dreamed of having a family. Kelly pored over the sketches. It turns out that in half a year, the educated woman was to have a show in Rome. Not yet, of course, as part of the World Fashion Week, but it was already happening. According to Slaga's assurances, it was a start. I wanted to be a designer too. You did. Wow. Tell me why you didn't. I had to make a living, Kelly shrugged. And then she realized how ugly it was to insinuate that someone was rich. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just didn't get a chance. Yeah, that's okay. We're in the middle of something. Maybe it's time to fulfill a dream. I don't get it. Kelly, looking at a few more sketches, here they were ruthlessly crossed out, and it seems were variations of what now no longer on paper, but in person tried to create a young fashion designer. Well, you can start learning now, answered so simply, as if the opportunity for this already lay. Ready only here is a hand outstretch. Understand, you probably have a talent, and that's a grain of happiness to miss out on in life. And if you don't do what you like, courage. She spoke beautifully, but of course, was cosmically far from the truth. After all, many, very many people are forced to do what they do not like, just to earn for themselves, and their relatives. Here, by the way, let's right now, the girl smiled and clapped her hands with her idea. I can, clarified Kelly, and when she nodded, in response drove her closer to the mannequin itself. I can't think of what to do. Right there, and she poked her finger at the mannequin's waistline and lower down the hip line. There has to be training here. I've tried 1,000 variations. It's all wrong. Here you go. She handed Kelly the pearl-headed pins. At first I wanted to refuse food. What does she know about it? But then I bit my lip and thought about it. Determined to get to work. Why not try it? For fun in the process did not interfere, silently watched. Ready, Kelly finally said. And as you can see, it worked. What she meant to say was that it turned out terribly. What else would you expect from an amateur? But then Clara showered her with compliments that it was original, fresh, and airy. And at the same time, the lines, as the fabric lay, turned out to be strict, perfectly capturing the essence of the mood of the flesh. She photographed the dress, went around it, shooting video, making it. This flew to Rome. What do you mean? It flew to Rome. Kelly Margaret, I sent to my teacher. The girl shrugged and gave me the name of a very famous designer. That it was the same one I did. I asked him for an answer. Does my friend have talent? Or should she look for another calling in life? But Kelly didn't understand how that was even possible, which is what she was doing. By the way, the fact that you learned to be a designer seamstress is a very good thing, because you understand the process of making clothes from the inside. Kelly didn't think about it in that way and only had to shake her head. Next, we talked not only about fashion, but also about the near future. Kelly noticed that her new friend had a very unusual, beautiful name, and she replied that it was just her mom, Rick's father's second wife, whom he took when the first one died of cancer, originally from Italy. That's where the name came from. And then it turned out that the day came very quickly when Kelly was to have surgery. The young woman was naturally worried and fell asleep under anesthesia. She was more sure that she was hopeless than the doctor said. But when she woke up, it turned out that the intervention was successful. And then, in the following days, it became clear that everything was even better than the doctors had originally planned. Kelly was on the mend. Of course, there was still a long rehabilitation process ahead. But still, the main thing was accomplished. Charles, by the way, during all this time with his wife practically did not communicate. He and Kelly called literally a couple times. How's it going? He didn't ask about her health. He only asked about Miranda because he'd been traveling so much for advice. Turns out he's doing just fine living away from his wife. And as Lisa relayed, he's not even sad. Unfortunately, he's been communicating more and more openly with that redhead from the first floor. Kelly, when she found out, didn't feel anything. But in the sense that she realized that her marriage to Charles had been built on a desperate desire to have a reliable, caring man around. It hadn't worked out that way. As fate had shown, love definitely never happened. She just didn't have the guts to admit it before, because she just didn't see any alternative to living alone. But now everything was changing, and Kelly felt more and more free. Lisa, in the time since Kelly had moved into the Smith house, had lived as she had before. Classes with students small their own joys. James, fortunately, as if to realize that marriage is not a joke matter, and it takes a lot of time to make that decision. But once discontent expressed, repeating the words of his mother that youth passes and that to create a family, it is better to think early. You twisted it like that. Lisa at the temple with her finger, rushing a girl into a relationship by insinuating that the girl is getting old. You know, honey, I'm going to think 100 more times after this that your candidacy with your mom on top of it is not the best option. James, blushing like a cancer. He apologized and even brought a bouquet of yellow roses. And yellow roses mean separation. I've heard of that, Lisa grumbled. But she took the bouquet. James was upset. I've known you too long, since the sandbox to be exact. Let's make a deal. If you're really counting on something serious, then just give me the time not to squeeze my soul out or the friendship we've had these years will start to, excuse me, disappear. James was in agreement. He agreed to everything now. But he was also determined that he would not back down. Because on the eve of the action you yourself brought, went to visit Cindy, and in the girl's room, the door was not very open. On the table noticed a bouquet of flowers, something lush like orchids. James didn't know about it, and he got suspicious, because there were no holidays at his beloved's house. So someone must have given them to her. Who? Wasn't it the rich man who took care of her friend? James wasn't afraid to lose, because it wouldn't mean anything to go against a man Lisa had known since childhood. But it still didn't feel right. He wanted Lisa to wear a wedding ring, as a married woman, and behave accordingly. Lisa herself was busy with something more important than thinking about whether it was time to get married. In the first place, she was watching her friend, and it seemed to her that Kelly might be a victim of something she couldn't quite understand. But it turned out that the wolf's interest was not simple, all this care. And on top of that, Lisa was a little jealous of her friend Clara. Up until now, in fact, she was the only one Lisa had been close friends with Kelly. And the appearance of a new character in the little company was unsettling. And even more so, she didn't want Kelly to fall under any bad influence. One day Lisa was rushing to class with that very student. A student whose parents had rejected her for being late, but had changed their minds. Lisa was triumphant. She was better than that. She hurried through the city, thinking that she should definitely stop by Kelly's to see how she was recovering from surgery. And suddenly, passing by the summer veranda, almost all in the city clothes they are already on it remained hidden, stretched instead of the walls of the canvas of coffee color. She heard a familiar voice. Rick was talking to someone, and Kelly's name sounded. The girl stopped on this side of the end adjacent to the building's summer veranda. There were hardly any passersby, but judging by the sounds, the talkers were sitting at the nearest table. Are the papers ready? Don't worry, a sample contract. I'll send you out tomorrow. What are our people saying? Well, it's a tricky situation, but I think we should take control of the main thing. From what I've heard, then it became clear that Rick met with his lawyer, and they talked about the fact that, it turns out, Miranda is not just Mason's daughter, but also his heir by law. Since Mason had gotten ownership of a not insignificant share of the family business from her father, it seemed to be about a lot of money. But the real shocker was something else. It turned out that Rick was concerned that Kelly, as the daughter's representative, could take over the business. He had no intention of letting that happen, and his plan was such that Lisa became furious and finally stopped respecting the man altogether. A real monster in the guise of a man, whom she had already as stupid as dollars. This man was already starting to. She liked, and those flowers he sent made her heart tingle. Hearing enough, and fearing that I here will find the exit from the summer veranda was literally a meter away from where Lisa was lurking, and she decided to leave, and realized, by the way, that she was late again. Again, she sighed, stopped, dialed the number of the student's parents, and not wanting to listen to compliments, told herself she wasn't coming. Circumstances forced it. They promised to leave a negative review on all resources. Lisa, with the phone on the ground, did not throw. Here, and that's Rick's fault, too, by the way. I got distracted by my conspiracy. How much did she hate him at that moment? But she got a grip. She had to talk to Kelly soon. Only it was only coming out that it could only be done later, because there was a new class in 3 o'clock, and to let herself lose this student. Lisa couldn't at all. Then Grandma Lisa's mom called. Lisa was not feeling well. Her heart was not up to the ambulance, but naturally the girl hurried home. And so it turned out that it was possible to get to the friend only the next day. And of course, I wanted to talk about everything on the phone. Lisa, I wanted to call you myself and demand that you come. My friend was in surprisingly good spirits, and somehow it seemed to Cindy that it wasn't just about her getting better. It's been an amazing day. Can you believe Miranda said she likes math? Rick suggested a really good tutor. Turns out Miranda's aptitude just needed a different approach. Lisa was in agreement with this until she started tutoring the girl in Russian. She never got higher than a B. Apparently, Miranda belonged to those kids who need a special way of presenting a topic that is difficult to learn. And their already better will go the girl would certainly be pleased with the success of a young student. We were about to have a serious conversation on a completely different topic, after which perhaps only now, as emotions had subsided, Lisa thought about the fact that by telling everything to Kelly could cross her all so prosperous present. But it was impossible to keep quiet about it, because then she would be in great danger, and Miranda would be in danger too. Lisa had already taken a breath of air into her chest to start throwing herself into the thick of it. Here, they were suddenly interrupted. Clara burst into the room as a positive hurricane. "Dad's here with a surprise. Just now he called. He's on his way." "Yay." Smiling brightly, she jumped up to Kelly and took her hand. "You need to get changed right away," she nodded, hinting at the house dress, a funny drawing of a mouse. Lisa was a little in shock. The situation was compounding into a disaster already, turning right before her eyes. She had time to learn that Jacob Smith was, in fact, the real master of the entire family business empire. It was he, not Rick, who made the key decisions, which meant Lisa realized she had to act decisively. "Where are you going?" Ockled her as she hurried to the door. "Kelly, I need to ask Rick something urgent." She dropped what she had in mind. Now she could only hope they were rich people who had no conscience or decency left, would listen to her, and if they didn't, Lisa hadn't decided what to do in that case. But she had no doubt that she wouldn't let her friend get hurt. After all, the operation had already been done, and successfully, so Kelly would be less dependent on this family. Damn it. "Where's Rick?" The maid caught her in the hallway. "He's in the study." But Jacob ordered, not listening to anyone, rushed further into the study, flew into it without knocking, without invitation. The dare of a puppy. The tall, gray-haired man slapped the man standing in front of him, Rick, with a hard swing. Lisa froze and stepped over the threshold. Ouch. Immediately it was clear the scene was clearly not for strangers' eyes. The men turned to her in sync. The one who was apparently Jacob, the head of the family, looked unhappy to have interrupted a thorough conversation with a guilty son. Rick, confused, they could see that they were very uncomfortable to be seen in this light. "I told you not to bother." "Who the hell are you?" Coolly threw the man. Lisa girl at first wanted to apologize and go out, but realized that this man, his weakness immediately smells, and therefore with him to deal with. How scary. As if the wolf took human form and is now looking into the soul, thinking about attack or wait. "I'm Kelly's friend," she clarified, and stepped boldly forward. "I know everything. I know what you're up to." That's how the role of the older man bent. He grinned. How interesting. Interesting. Lisa, who was no longer afraid at all, erupted, and she said everything she thought about Rick and Rick's sinister plan. And then something began to dawn on her. She suddenly, as she considered the emotions, Rick's father's anger, confusion, and vulnerability. And she even thought that if you began to be a gray-haired man gesturing for silence. Lawyers, thankfully, work for me, not him. And then last night I got the curious news that my own son had decided to follow in his brother's footsteps. Rick, tell me, did you think I wouldn't find out anything at all seriously? Like I didn't know you were coming? Yeah, your accounts are kind of on lockdown, by the way. What did I explain? Well, try me, but later. In the meantime, I must apologize to this lovely girl. He turned to Cindy again. I'm sorry the case was delayed. I should have dropped it and come down here. Once I found out I had a granddaughter. Why don't you sit down? We need to have a serious talk. Cindy was beginning to think that everything that was happening was not real, that she had become the heroine of a movie, a drama, and a thriller. The questions were finally answered. Lisa's panic and fear for her friend was justified. It turned out that Rick was planning to fall in love with Kelly and marry her, as well as adopt Miranda. Thus, he would have full power over the little girl heir to his brother's fortune. And what's more, Jacob Smith stated in almost direct text that his son had no intention of treating Kelly well and with care. Apparently, he wanted her on a purely formal basis. Dad, but I wouldn't. Rick started to start, but his father gave him a look that made him hesitate and shut up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted. You're not supposed to breathe without my permission now. I'm sure you'd make the poor girl's life a living hell. After everything your brother's done. Does that sound like atonement for his sins? I'm afraid I was wrong. You and he are too much alike. It's been decided. I'll transfer the shares to Clara. What can't you do? She refused to enter the family business. But she's always been honest. Technically, she can hold the second largest stake after mine. I can't really trust you with it. Look, this is all very important. But it's for you to try and get Lisa's attention back. What about Kelly? You realize she can't now. What are you talking about? The girl. Formally, but somehow it sounded not rude, not dismissive, more trusting, patronizing. Addressed her Jacob. Do you really want your friend to go back to her old life in a poor apartment where that man is waiting for her? I don't believe in fate. I just know that I have a granddaughter and I don't intend to leave her to her fate. Yes, she's the heir to a great fortune. It just so happens. Technically, everything Mason owned went to me as his father, but Miranda is entitled to it, and always has been. And I intend to make sure the girl takes advantage of every opportunity that comes her way. She's not only your friend's daughter, she's my own blood. But Lisa began, but faded under the strange look in Korea's eyes. What Rick was up to must not be known to anyone. Kelly, there is no need to know. Let her life be more peaceful after everything. I agree. I'm bringing her up to speed myself, personally making sure that no one and nothing is threatened now. And then Lisa asked the question that had plagued her ever since she learned that Rick was plotting a mercantile marriage to her best friend. Why did you send me flowers? Why did you act like you liked me? Lisa, look, I know what I did was selfish, mean. So can we talk in private? No, you talk here. I've had enough of your secrets. Besides, I'm really interested to hear about your adventures, you know. Father Rick clearly enjoyed the helpless submission of a son who depended on him for everything. He'd been brought up so that rebellion, though it happened, was quelled quickly. Cindy felt even a little sorry for Rick. He seemed so brutally fair, but not sorry enough to feel anything like disgust for him and a desire to get away from his company as soon as possible. Yeah, I was thinking that marriage to Kelly would be a formality. She'd have social status. She wouldn't need anything. And with you? You wanted to make me your mistress. I've never met a man like that before. You're just. Because Rick's father was here. After all, I'm so sorry I let myself get weak and thought it was sincere. So, you know, time is running out. And Jacob got up from his chair. I think I need to go see Kelly and my granddaughter. Lisa was overwhelmed with emotion. She found the strength to curb them. She realized that right now her best friend was essentially at a crossroads. She could fall back, because even getting her health back would be difficult. Or could she actually take advantage of all that Jacob Smith was offering? She could easily just divorce Charles. And Miranda, the girl, could get a good start in life. So Lisa swore to herself. She kept the dark secret safe. She also believed, it was just a gut feeling, that Jacob Smith is another complicated and cruel man who lives by his own set of rules. But he wouldn't hurt Kelly and Miranda. Kelly met Jacob. She liked him immediately. Later, she confided in Lisa that it was as if she could sense in him the father figure she never had. Miranda was wary of the serious uncle at first, but then agreed to call him Grandpa. And then, when he gave her a marvelous plush giraffe and a box of chocolate-covered raspberries, she even dared to ask that if she got a grandfather, couldn't her daddy magically appear as well? And Jacob wondered. He could, of course, introduce Kelly to several worthy young men and naturally belong to his circle. But he promised himself to give it some serious thought. Rick for two reasons. To keep him out of the way and for educational purposes, Jacob had sent him to the other side of the country to deal with a local problem branch of one of the family business branches. Clara took the news about the transfer of her shareholding as Jacob expected. She fought back with all her might, but then resigned herself to the fact that there was no hiding from the family business. However, she had reason to rejoice. The designer to whom she sent a photo of Kelly's dress said that this girl definitely has talent. Kelly was in a pleasant shock from such news. But the idea that maybe she could realize her dream and do what she likes in life was already beckoning, especially since earnings could be taken care of for now. And Jacob assured her that all the business of transferring the Mason property to Miranda had already been started by his lawyers, and naturally everything would be held in trust. And the little girl and her mother, as they call it, could only skim the cream. Lisa was happy with the way things were lining up, and it seemed she had finally gotten off the carousel of caregiving, albeit the care of her best friend, but it was someone else's life, while her own seemed to be on pause, and now it was time for a change. One evening, Lisa herself called James and told him they needed to meet, despite the increasingly consuming world around them. Fall. The weather was nice, warm. The couple walked slowly down the alley, rustling the leaves. "Do you still want us to get married?" she asked. James stopped, caught her by the shoulders, looked her in the eyes so hard it was clear. "I guess I agree. No offense, but we've been friends for so many years. It's not easy to move on to new ones like this. I'll try. Let's just take it slow. Let's just have a nice romance first. I also want us to learn to understand each other better. Otherwise, it'll be a scandal. Does that suit you?" Maybe not. It was not worth talking about love and the future at all, but Lisa didn't know any other way. James smiled and nodded. "I know I'm not perfect, but I'm glad you're giving me a chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make us happy." Subscribe and click the bell.
Ethan couldn't sleep. His life had been eventful lately. But what had happened today? It just didn't make sense. How is that possible? Ethan realized he was smiling again. Wow! He'd long ago forgotten about that orphan boy. The orphan boy, the one who'd ended up in his ward, but fate had turned around. The street lamp shone brightly through the window, so that every object in the ward was clearly visible, including the half-empty box of chocolates. Ethan himself had forgotten that he had once adored these candies, and he hadn't seen them on sale for a long time. But there was a man on earth who remembered his little weakness and even found the box to please Ethan. So everything was not in vain: the penny wages, delays at work, and hard labor. Sometimes he wanted to quit his position as a doctor in the district hospital and go to a more monetary job, but something kept stopping him. Ethan couldn't leave his colleagues and patients. He just couldn't. He scolded himself for it, but continued to stay at his post. Even when a childhood friend opened an automobile workshop and called him to be an administrator, offering a good salary, even when his wife called him a loser, even when his daughter was born and the four of us in a 2-room apartment became cramped. It seemed to Ethan that leaving his position as head of the pulmonology department was tantamount to betrayal. He joined the hospital right after residency. At first, he worked under the supervision of an experienced doctor. Then he began to manage patients himself, and gradually it became clear that Ethan had developed some kind of sixth sense. He had a special instinct that helped him diagnose and select the right treatment. A special category of patients were children. Actually, there was a special department for young patients, but it was often overcrowded, so the small charges came to Ethan's floor. Now such cases have become isolated, but earlier, when the hospital was smaller, children came to Ethan's floor regularly. And just today, being in the unusual role of a patient himself, Ethan remembered one of his little patients, a boy of about 12 to 13 years old from the orphanage who came to the hospital with pneumonia. Of course, he remembered it for a reason, of course. There had been 1,000 patients in his department over the years of his work, of course. You can't keep everyone in your memory. But Daniel was special and reminded of himself in a very surprising way. Ethan was still a young specialist at the time, but already respected and authoritative. His opinion was considered. He was consulted by more experienced colleagues. By that time, Ethan realized that he had chosen the right path: pulmonology. People with various diseases of the respiratory system, blue lips, pale skin, the man over time learned to distinguish his patients from afar, saw them on the street in shopping centers and parks. Ethan made diagnosis, developed appropriate treatment regimens, and put them into practice. Carefully approached each case, and people began to breathe again. The patient's quality of life changed dramatically for the better. The doctor felt great joy when he saw that the former patient was healthy, full of strength, happy, a tremendous return. Unfortunately, not all stories ended well. Ethan immediately noticed patients who did not have much chance of recovery. He recognized it in some subtle way, signs. Daniel, the boy from the orphanage, was one of them. Ethan saw the teenager being processed in the emergency room. Daniel had been brought in by two women, the local internet medic and one of the caretakers, apparently. They were answering questions. The admitting nurse was filling out paperwork, and on the couch, with his back against the wall, sat Daniel, thin, pale, dark blonde bangs falling almost to his eyes, spiky shoulder blades. The boy was taking his temperature, his t-shirt tugging at the thermometer sticking out of his armpit. Ethan didn't like the look in the boy's eyes, a dull, indifferent look that said he was very sick, and the chances of recovery were slim. Ethan still remembered how his heart had shrunk with pity for the boy. He decided that he would do whatever he could to get the young patient out. Then there was the examination. Temp under 40, saturation critical, lungs wheezing, labs showing severe inflammation. Ethan was outraged. How did the orphanage bring the child to such a state? Why didn't they seek professional help sooner? The local nurse fed Daniel with useless pills, antipyretics, painkillers, even cough medicine she gave him, but he got worse and worse. Now the boy's situation was critical. X-rays showed pneumonia with extensive lung damage. The young patient was transferred to the intensive care unit, connected to a ventilator, began to administer the necessary drugs. Daniel either fell asleep or lost consciousness. Ethan sat next to him and looked at the skinny teenager, so pale, almost blending in with the white hospital pillowcase. Very young and no longer wanted by anyone. It was evident in his faded gaze and general lack of grooming. An orphan? What can I say? Life in an orphanage is certainly not sugar. Ethan was afraid to leave the boy's side that night. It seemed that in his absence the worst might happen. The child's condition was too unstable. The ward was quiet that night. Old patients were already on the mend, and there were no new arrivals. The nurse on duty looked in several times, offered the doctor to go to the restroom, to lie down, a little, to drink tea. He refused. He could not leave Daniel now. He felt it was dangerous, and he was worried for a reason. At about 4 a.m. the boy got worse. He turned blue, wheezed, and all this without regaining consciousness. Ethan immediately, without a second, called for the help of an on-duty resuscitator, and the two of them several tediously long minutes brought Daniel back to life. The kid was breathing again. The beeping of the instruments was steady as it should be. Ethan exhaled with relief. It was gone. The doctor didn't leave his post until morning. even though he felt that the crisis was over, that the boy was no longer in danger. Daniel's chest rose and fell evenly. At the thought of what would have happened if he hadn't been there at the critical moment, Ethan felt sick to his stomach. He and his wife had recently had a son, a cheeky, funny-looking baby, Mason, now sniffling peacefully in his crib. He and Margaret had surrounded the newborn with love and care, giving him plenty of warmth and attention every day. It seemed that all this is vital for the little man. Mason literally blossomed from their smiles, hugs, warm words, and this Daniel, how does he and others like him live? The boy was in the intensive care unit in the most serious condition, and the adults were to blame for it. By the way, for not sounding the alarm in time, and it was almost 9 a.m., Ethan would soon have to make his rounds, and then hand over his shift to his colleagues, and no one had ever called to ask about the boy's condition. Ethan looked at the boy with pity. It seemed to him that his cheeks had turned a little pink. Just a little, of course. He still had a lot of healing to do, but the crisis was over. There was a chance that he would be all right. Ethan couldn't resist ruffling the young patient's blonde hair. Daniel's recovery had been slow and difficult. The damage to his lungs was very extensive. The boy had difficulty breathing, and he coughed to the point of nausea at the slightest physical exertion. The child was temporarily removed from the ventilator, but the transfer to a regular ward was too much to talk about. Every now and then the kid's saturation dropped sharply, and we had to give him oxygen. Ethan spent a lot of time at the bedside of the little patient. They talked for a long time, if Daniel's condition allowed it. The boy's story about his life in the orphanage shook Ethan, an adult, to the core. Above all, the indifference of the staff was surprising. For example, one day Daniel told in a mundane tone that he was being bullied by several older teenagers from the orphanage, robbed of food, forced to clean their beds for them, and to be on duty, just clinging. Tripping, insults. Once they even beat Daniel for disobedience, quite severely and brutally, and all this with the tacit consent of the caretakers and nannies. Daniel recounted these egregious incidents simply and naturally, as if they were commonplace, a matter of course. He was not alone in this situation. In the orphanage, it was the norm that the older ones hurt the younger ones. There are those who offend, and there are victims. For the children of the orphanage, it was natural, habitual routine. There was nowhere to wait for help. The educators turn a blind eye and advise them to deal with it themselves. But how can a physically thin, not strong boy stand up to a crowd of big, angry teenagers? The orphanage staff also invented humiliating punishments for the most seemingly innocent misdemeanors. For example, Daniel once knelt in a corner in the corridor, in his underwear for half a night, just for drawing after bedtime, with a flashlight under a blanket. This was noticed by the duty teacher, and got very angry. On the antics of older and strong those who can already fight back, the staff turned a blind eye. They were allowed to do anything, but on the weak, the adults came off at full speed. From the stories of Daniel, Ethan concluded that the educators banally take out their anger on the children, compensate for their own powerlessness. This, of course, is scary. Daniel did not complain. Ethan learned about the horrors of being in the orphanage by asking leading questions. The boy told about his life, his existence, in an even tone. For him, it was all familiar, natural. The boy did not know that it could be otherwise. One day, Ethan couldn't stand it and wrote a letter to the city administration, without mentioning names and surnames, so as not to frame Daniel. In this note, the man told about what was going on in the walls of the children's institution. Ethan heard that after his appeal, a commission came to the orphanage. Checks were made. The pupils were questioned. Had anything changed then? The doctor did not know the exact answer to this question, but he really hoped that he had helped the little children and Daniel in particular. Gradually, a special, very warm, trusting relationship developed between the patient and the doctor. The boy looked forward to Ethan's arrival in the intensive care ward and smiled at him every time, even if he had no strength at all. The man tried to make the boy laugh, cheer him up, told him anecdotes and funny stories of his childhood. He asked him to get well soon because a dolphinarium had come to town and the orphans would definitely be taken there, so Daniel had to be in line by the end of the month. One day, when Ethan went to check on Daniel as usual, the phone rang in his robe pocket. His wife was calling. Margaret had asked him to buy some milk for her and had disconnected. Was that Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata? Daniel inquired. It was, he asked at the ringtone. Beautiful music. You know your classics. Ethan smiled. Are you interested? Or maybe they teach music in your orphanage. I didn't always grow up in an orphanage. Answered the boy. Yes, and I understand that you were transferred there from the maternity hospital. I saw something like that in the documents, or am I wrong? You're not wrong. My real mom gave me up right away. I don't know her and I don't know why she did it, but I was really transferred to the baby house, right from the maternity ward. Ethan's heart squeezed at the thought. He had recently picked up his wife and tiny son from the maternity ward. Guests, balloons, a sea of colors and smiles, relatives and friends joyfully welcoming the new member of the family. It was such an event, such a celebration. The man could hardly hold back the tears of happiness. For the first time, bent the corner of the envelope and looked at the wrinkled red face of the baby. Many beautiful pictures remained from that day, and when Mason grew older, he would look at them with interest. And Daniel, how was he? Probably lying alone, in the ward of refuseniks. They say that such children do not even cry. They understand that no one will come to them anyway, and then wrapped up in a gray blanket, the boy moved to the baby house, where he was hardly very happy. After all, the appearance of a new child in such an institution means for the staff only an increase in the number of worries. I lived in the orphanage, Daniel continued, remembering almost nothing about that period of my life, and then I was transferred to an orphanage. And from there, when I was about 4 years old, I was adopted by a man and a woman, rich. We lived in a big house, even had a swimming pool. At first, Daniel felt like he was in heaven. The new parents did a lot to educate the child. The boy had a music teacher who gave him piano lessons. His father taught the boy to swim, and now, almost every day, Daniel had a swim in his own pool. The child was taken to the city for soccer lessons. Daniel did not like the training, but not to upset his parents, he pretended to be delighted. And he tried very hard to be praised by coaches and teachers. Let his parents know that they had chosen him for a reason, Daniel. He wanted to be the perfect son for them, or they might bring him back. Daniel had his own room, spacious, stylishly furnished, closets bursting with toys and clothes. That's my mother. She loved to go shopping with me, the boy recalled. My father worked all day long, and here she is. With her, we sometimes spent many hours in a row in shopping centers. Most of the time, we had one of her friends with kids around my age with us. It was torture, to be honest. Daniel didn't share his foster mother's love of shopping. He tried on suits in the clothing departments without complaint. He waited for his mother when she picked out outfits and bags for herself, sat in cafes listening to his mother's boring, long conversations with her friends. He was sent off to play with the children of his friends on the playground, but Daniel could not get along with them. For some reason, the children teased him, insulted him, pinched him, and all this in a sneaky way, and their games were boring and uninteresting. The boy avoided contacts with these so-called friends as much as he could. His mother noticed something wrong and reprimanded her adopted son, calling him an outcast and other incomprehensible words. The mother's displeasure was the most frightening thing for Daniel at that time. He wanted to feel loved and needed. He wanted to give joy to his foster parents, and when it did not work, he was upset and very afraid that he would be taken back. Daniel hoped that time would pass and he would be loved, but the years passed and the situation did not change on the face of the foster mother. More and more often appeared half-squeamish expression when looking at her son. She quickly grew tired of him, tried to avoid communication by all means. The father, he was almost absent from the child's life. The man was constantly working to provide the family with a comfortable existence. He noticed his son only when he achieved any success. For example, Daniel received his father's sincere praise when he won a music competition at school, performing the best in his age group, a difficult piece, or when only once, Daniel was recognized as the first player of a soccer match and awarded him a gold-plated statuette. The father, glowing with pride, took pictures of his successful son and put his arm around the boy's shoulders. The rest of the time, the man just didn't notice Daniel. Ethan listened and wondered. Daniel had been adopted. He'd grown up in a family for a while. But in fact, nothing had changed for him there. The same indifference, the same dislike. Only the setting was different. A palace with a swimming pool instead of shabby gray walls. She didn't know I could hear, but I did. Sharing my feelings with Ethan Daniel, the boy's voice trembling. It was obvious that the boy had never told his story to anyone, and now he was relieved to be able to tell it to someone who cared about him. She is mine, not a real mother. She told my father that I irritate and tire her, that she can no longer see me, that I am capricious, that I bore her. Wow. What did he say? He said there's no going back, and that she shouldn't whine, especially because I'm almost always handled by the nanny, not her. And that a child wasn't a toy to be played with and left behind, and his mother had rebuked him, saying that he wasn't particularly eager to hang out with his son, and so on. Daniel remembered that one day anger settled in him, and he began to do terrible things to piss off the foster mother, to see on her face some emotion, indifference, coldness. The boy couldn't stand it any longer. From a docile and calm child, Daniel turned into a devil. He deliberately broke and damaged things, rude to adults, stopped obeying their instructions. Once he shook the contents of his mother's purse right into the pool for refusing to take him to a birthday party. It wasn't that Daniel wanted to go, he just needed an excuse for another prank. His mother had beaten him for the first time, slapping his cheeks, slapping his back a little lower. It didn't hurt at all. He'd gotten it worse at the orphanage. Daniel laughed in her face and was surprised to see fear in the woman's eyes, in addition to anger and annoyance. She was afraid of him. That's how she discovered him. More on that next. Daniel poured into the sink the contents of the beautiful bottles of his father's bar, ruined with Scissor's designer dress mother, in which she was going to go to the corporate party to her husband. He let the family's favorite parrot, Jocko, out of his cage. The bird flew off to an unknown destination and never returned. Scattered garbage from a bucket all over the house, poured paint into the pool, trampled some flower beds in the garden. Daniel invented more and more pranks to piss off his parents, to draw attention to himself. He got punished for it, but the boy wasn't afraid of punishment. It was like he was possessed by a demon. I think I was getting back at them then. Ethan confessed to Daniel, "I'm ashamed of my behavior now. It wasn't their fault that they couldn't love me, but I was so disappointed. All my dreams of a loving, happy family were shattered. I tried so hard to please them. I tried to make music and go to soccer. This hateful went to and tolerated shopping trips. But they, especially her, they looked at me like something unpleasant, unnecessary. So I took my revenge on them. Daniel was taken to the doctor, preceded by a serious conversation between the couple. The boy heard everything from his bedroom. What doctor? The father was indignant. So that everyone thinks that my child is abnormal? Yes, you just dissolved it. Not for nothing you cannot have children of their own. You just do not know how to communicate with them. I told you motherhood wasn't for you. No, you wanted a doll for yourself. That's it. Now you've got it, so raise it instead of going to the salons. He is crazy. My mother screamed. You're never home. Can't you see what he's doing? And if one night he'll just send us all to the other side of the world. Didn't you think of that? The parents argued for a long time. They talked about Daniel as a problem to be solved. They weren't frightened by their son's condition and didn't really care about his fate. The father did not want a child with a diagnosis in the family. The mother, on the other hand, hoped to get a diagnosis and send the unwanted child to the hospital, at least for a while, to breathe free. And that's when I clearly realized what a burden I was to both of them. Daniel shook his head sadly and realized that they didn't need me, that they would never love me, so he calmed down, accepted the situation, decided to take it as it came. Ethan shivers. Daniel was about 7 years old then, a very young child, and already such problems, such thoughts. Daniel left his antics, but it was too late. His mother took the boy to a doctor, a paid one, a very expensive one, who was determined to fulfill any wish of the client, and the mother's wish was absolutely clear, to get a diagnosis so that she could legally dump the boy where he came from, in an orphanage. That's how I became a mentally unhealthy person. Daniel said words that were not appropriate for his age. My mother screamed at the head of the orphanage that they had given them a crazy person and promised to deal with them. And I was assigned a health group, with which usually no one takes children in the family who needs such a big child, and even with a frightening diagnosis. So now I live in a boarding school. I can't wait to grow up. Do you want to become an adult sooner? Asked Ethan, shocked by the young patient's story. Of course they are children. That is, we are weak, defenseless, powerless. Nobody counts us. Adults are different. When I am big and rich, I will definitely take a child from an orphanage, or even 2 or 3, as many as my wife allows, and I will be a real dad to them. I'll always talk to them and fulfill their wishes. Ethan smiled. Daniel, in spite of what he had to endure, was not embittered. That boy had a surprisingly good heart. He'd been betrayed twice, he'd had a hard time in the orphanage, and he didn't even hold a grudge against his foster parents. On the contrary, he was grateful for a few years spent in their beautiful rich house. It was only there that I realized I had talent. Daniel smiled. His breath was getting short, and his lips were turning slightly blue from the long conversation. Ethan noted these warning signs and prepared to call the nurse for oxygen, but he still wanted to finish the conversation, especially since Daniel himself was interested in it. What talent have you discovered? I draw well, especially buildings, constructions. I see. I immediately grasped the essence. Even when I was very young, I was able to draw 3-dimensional images. Even my mother praised me. Here, let's get well soon. We'll transfer you to the ward. I'll bring you pencils and a sketchbook, and draw me something to remember. Okay, sure, Daniel promised. Ethan left the room and thought about it. The boy's condition had stabilized, but the light, too extensive lesions. A drug, very expensive and rare, was needed for recovery. Without it, without this drug, irreparable things could happen to the child. The same day, the doctor contacted the orphanage management and explained the situation. "Treat with what you have." The head of the orphanage cut him off. "Our budget does not include such items. You understand, the lung damage is so great that there is no way without this medicine. I will provide all the necessary reports and documents. Push for funding. The drug is necessary and urgent. It is not included in the list of those paid from the budget." The superintendent stood her ground. Ethan hung up. Everything was clear with them. Nobody needed this pale, russet-haired Daniel, the artist. If he suddenly disappeared, perhaps nobody would notice or be upset. Complete indifference to the fate of the pupil. Trying to get something from the administration of the orphanage is like banging your head against a concrete wall. Ethan tried to apply to the fund for helping sick children, but even here he met an obstacle. The man never fully understood why, but the fact that Daniel is an orphanage resident played against him. The boy is under the care of the state, which means that it should pay for his treatment. Funds collected money for treatment of only domestic children, family children, a terrible injustice. Total indifference to Daniel's fate depressed Ethan. The boy was getting worse and worse, and the relief was temporary. Standard medications were no longer working, and Daniel was put back on ventilator. The boy was melting every day. Ethan could not bear to watch it, and the man made up his mind. He withdrew the money he had been saving for a new car and bought drugs for Daniel without even consulting his wife, because Margaret, although she was a kind, warm-hearted woman, would not understand or approve of this act. Ethan decided that he would make amends. Gradually, he would save from his paycheck and accumulate the necessary amount, but Daniel could not wait. At the hospital, Ethan explained to his colleagues that he had found a rich sponsor for the boy, and only one nurse, the elderly Clara, knew where the money actually came from. She happened to see a receipt for the payment, which showed the name of the account holder from which the money had been debited. Ethan smiled and put his finger to his lips, saying not to spread. The old woman nodded and hugged the young doctor, who himself, being in a bad financial situation, decided to save the boy from inevitable death. Daniel recovered quickly on the new medication. Soon, Ethan, with relief, transferred the patient to a regular ward. The boy had fun. He was happy to communicate with the medical staff and other patients. Laughing a lot, Ethan looked at all this and realized he had made the right choice. If it wasn't for the medication, none of this would have happened. No Daniel smiles, no fun games, no amazing drawings. Ethan kept his promise. He brought a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils to the kid's room. That same day, Daniel found the doctor on the floor and demonstrated the drawing. Ethan did not expect such a thing. In front of him was a surprisingly accurate image of a piece of the street, seen from the window of the boy's room, a wide boulevard, the building of a shopping center, passers by hurrying somewhere. You drew this yourself?" "Of course I did," Daniel answered, clearly pleased with the doctor's reaction. "Wow, you really are a talent." When Daniel said he was good at drawing, Ethan had envisioned something a little different. He'd expected a beautiful, but still childlike and primitive drawing, but here it was as if a professional artist had done the work. The shadows, the light, the volume, the image looked surprisingly lifelike and realistic. "Did someone teach you?" Ethan asked, still not believing his eyes. "Did your foster parents take you to art school?" "No." Daniel shook his head. They wanted their son to be a star soccer player, not an artist. And in the orphanage we have drawing, but it's boring they put a vase in front of you and tell you to draw. I draw what I see and what I like. You have to study. You have to study. Do you hear me? I'll talk to your teachers. Thank you. Maybe they'll listen to you because they want me to study to be a tiler. After the 9th grade, I heard, and I dream of being an artist or even an architect. I like to design buildings. An architect? Ethan grinned sadly. I don't think that would be a career for a kid from an orphanage. There's no way he's going to get into architecture schools, and no one will pay for his studies. It was a pity. The boy was really very talented. Christmas was approaching. It was obvious that Daniel would have to spend it in the hospital. He had a long recovery ahead of him. The boy was glad of that. He liked it in the hospital. He got along well with the locals, and he was especially reluctant to part with his new friend, Ethan the doctor, the first adult who had ever cared for him. Ethan realized that he had grown attached to the boy. Of course, he couldn't do that, but he couldn't help it. After the hospital, Daniel would have to go back to his old life, full of danger, punishment, indifference, and cold. The man wanted to give this boy at least a little warmth and care as long as he can do it. Therefore, the doctor decided to please the boy for Christmas, to present Daniel something that will definitely make him happy. It should not be some faceless surprise like a set of sweets. Once Ethan found himself with his wife and son in a children's store. The baby was growing so fast, he needed to update his closet. While Margaret and Mason wandered among the clothing departments, Ethan strolled by the racks of toys. There were robots and interactive animals and sets for creativity. The eyes were scattered, and then the man's eyes fell on a big box, a young architect's constructor, sets of blocks from which you can assemble fanciful constructions. There was even decor, tiny shrubs, trees, parts for fountains, and the like interesting little things. Ethan remembered Daniel's words that he liked to invent interesting buildings and realized that this constructor was just made for a young, talented patient. The price, of course, was a biting price, but his wife smilingly approved of her husband's decision, and they bought this brightly colored box. What joy Daniel's eyes lit up when Ethan presented him with the gift. It was the day before Christmas, after the doctor had given the post to the morning shift. Ethan would spend the holiday with his family, but afterward, he would be sure to bring Daniel and his ward roommates treats from the holiday table. Margaret has prepared enough for the whole hospital. Now Daniel spent his mornings and evenings constructing. He turned out really impressive constructions, ergonomic, stylish, aesthetically pleasing. The boy was sure to write down each model in a scrapbook, then dismantle the building and build a new, even more original and interesting. By the time he was discharged, the boy had several albums of such drawings. Ethan once borrowed them and showed them at the Design Center, a prestigious institution where children were taught the basics of architectural design. Classes in the studio were expensive. Students participated in all sorts of competitions and won prizes. But Daniel was ready to accept for free, just to get such a talented student. Ethan explained the situation, said that the boy was brought up in an orphanage, that no one would promote him, let alone pay for his education and trips to competitions. The director thanked him and promised that he would fix everything, because such talent should not go to waste. Ethan left the Design Center with a light heart. It looked like Daniel was seriously interested in this place. You bet, the boy clearly has a rare gift, and the prestigious institution needs more victories. Daniel will definitely provide them. Now the boy will develop professionally in the right direction. Ethan couldn't wait to tell the teenager about everything. He would be happy. His life would no longer be the same. Daniel was happy, of course, but as the discharge approached, he became sadder and sadder. He didn't want to leave the hospitable wards where he was treated so well. Ethan was also sorry to part with Daniel, as he had grown attached to him during that time. He even had a serious talk with Margaret about taking a boy from the orphanage. Daniel was good, bright, kind, and would be a pleasure to take care of Mason. Ethan was really ready to take Daniel into the family, to become a father, a mentor. Why not? But Margaret was adamantly opposed. Are you crazy? We need to feed our own. Where else can we get another one? Especially one so grown up? We probably won't even get one. The apartment is small. The wages are small too. Ethan sighed, of course. His wife was right, but Daniel wouldn't be lost now. Everything will be fine for him. On the eve of discharge, the doctor and the patient had a long conversation. They were sitting in the nurse's lounge, drinking tea with Ethan's favorite candies. The kid appreciated them too. The man tried to set the boy up for a new life, to inspire him. He talked about how important it was for him to work, to develop his talent. He left Daniel his phone number and asked him to call if he had any difficulties. Daniel nodded and smiled, but his eyes were sad and sorrowful. You'll be gone in the morning. Your shift will be over, so we don't have another opportunity to talk, the boy said. Yes, Ethan nodded. You'll be discharged without me. I'm so grateful to you, the boy said, looking seriously into the doctor's eyes. I know you saved my life. Well, I was just doing my job. Ethan shrugged. You did a good job, you made it. Not on my own. I know all about it, Daniel admitted quietly. Tears welled up in his eyes. I should have died. I heard the nurses talking, and you saved me twice. The first time was the night I arrived, when you sat next to my bed and noticed in time that I wasn't feeling well. I was with my eyes closed, but I felt everything, understood everything, knew that you were near me. I was so afraid you'd leave, but you were called many times to rest, but you didn't leave. So you felt everything then. I thought you were unconscious. No, I was conscious, but I just didn't have any energy. It was so hard, so scary, I thought I was dying. I was dying, but you didn't leave me for a minute and saved me, helped me at the right moment. It's a miracle I was there for you. Ethan confessed. Everything really could have ended horribly, but I'm a doctor. It's my duty to save the sick. You just couldn't be left behind. But someone else would have. Exercised Daniel, and Ethan didn't bother to argue, because the kid was right. It was true that a doctor was not obliged to sit at the bedside of a patient in intensive care all night, especially when the condition had been stabilized, but the man felt. With his animal instinct that Daniel should not be left alone at that moment, not at all. But that's not all, the boy continued. I know all this. You bought me that expensive medicine with your own money, and without it I wouldn't exist. But where did you get this information from? The doctor was surprised. Well, I wouldn't want to reveal my sources, but okay. Just promise me that you won't scold anyone. Do I look like a scolder to you? You don't. You're just the opposite. But then you'll have to come clean. Clara blurted it out while she was changing my IVs. She told me. She even cried then. She was so moved by your kindness. Ethan sighed. Clara, information about the financial side of the case, and even more so about Daniel being on the verge of death, was not for children's ears. Thank you. I owe you my life? Without thinking about it. Ethan asked softly. That's what adults owe you. You're a child, you have rights. You have the right to learn, to be safe, to live, to be treated. Adults owe it all to their children, and you've had a hard time, but you can't be in a bad place forever, can you? Your life's gonna change now. You're gonna study. You'll definitely get noticed. Everything will be fine. Just don't get sick. Don't be lazy, work, develop. It's a deal." Daniel smiled. Ethan ruffled his blonde hair. "That's it. I have to make my evening rounds of the intensive care units. See if there's anyone in urgent need of help. Have a good night's work." Daniel got up from his chair and was about to leave, but at the door he turned around and said, "I'll save you too someday. You'll see we'll meet again, and I'll help you in some way for sure. Go to bed already, you lifeguard." Ethan smiled. "You don't owe me anything. I was just doing my job, and if you want to thank me, become a successful, wealthy man and help those who are weaker than you. Deal?" Daniel nodded seriously and walked out. Good kid, Ethan thought then. Kind, grateful, may he be lucky in life. That was their last meeting before he was discharged. The next time Ethan came to work, Daniel was gone, back at the orphanage. The doctor sincerely hoped that the boy's life would change now, that the director of the design center had managed to reach an agreement with the administration of the orphanage, and Daniel would study in the best institution in the city. The boy certainly deserved it. It's been 15 years. During this time, a lot of things happened in Ethan's life. There were victories and failures at work. The same could be said about his personal life. Ethan and Margaret had a second child, a daughter, Susan. Living in a 2-room apartment became cramped, but there was no money to buy a new apartment. Margaret reproached her husband that he could not part with his hospital and find a better-paid job. "All the days in the department, I am alone with the children in the house, so at least bring money, but that's how small things count. We do not see anything." My wife was almost sobbing. Ethan did not even try to argue. There was nothing to object. Margaret is right, but the man could not do anything. It was impossible to abandon the department. Ethan's heart ached for each patient. He did everything to make the percentage of recoveries grow steadily, and the number of medical failures tended to 0. Only not everything was in his hands. Funding was not enough. It was high time to make repairs on the floor, and the equipment needed to be updated, because the XI century was upon us, and they were still using prehistoric devices. Ethan had raised the issue many times at meetings, but it had no effect. There were always more important objects that required urgent injection of funds. "Yes, your ward is fine for now," assured the head doctor. There in cardiology the roof leaks, and in orthopedics wiring sparked, almost had a fire. Our X-ray machine does not see gross pathologies. The equipment is all old. The walls are shabby, covered with mold. For pulmonology patients, it's dangerous, very dangerous. "Ethan, come on. Can't you see the state of the other wards? It's not the time." Ethan did not give up, submitted applications, wrote to the city administration and the mayor's office, but in response he received either a refusal or empty responses, or even silence. The case has not moved for several years, and one day Ethan called the chief physician to his office. "Well, what happened? Something from the realm of the fantastic." He said cryptically, "What?" Ethan didn't understand. "Well, you've been writing everywhere you can, trying to get funding for the department." "Yeah." "Knocked on every door." "I did." "Well, I got through. We've got a sponsor who wants to fund the renovation of the pulmonology department and buy modern equipment for diagnostics, treatment, and rehabilitation." Wow! Ethan couldn't believe his ears. He had long since resigned himself to the fact that his actions were having no effect, and now this. This mysterious patron is asking us for an estimate. I mean, a list of the work, the equipment needed, and so on, to see how much money we need. I'll get to the report right away. Ethan had already started to make a list of the necessary items in his mind, and he couldn't wait to get it down on paper. A worrying thought crept into his head. What if the sponsor changed his mind, or even turned out to be a mistake? This whole situation looked too improbable and even magical. Don't be modest, the head doctor advised. Write everything you need and even more, and if they tell you to moderate your ardor, then we'll do it. Ethan wasn't being modest. He wasn't asking for himself. He was asking for the patients. With the help of modern medical equipment, they would be able to save more lives, and in renovated wards, without whitewash and mold on the walls, it would be much easier and more pleasant to recover. To the surprise of Ethan and the head doctor, the sponsor took into account all the wishes and immediately transferred the necessary amount to the hospital account, even without haggling and asking unnecessary questions. On the floor, the repair began. Temporarily, Ethan, his colleagues, and patients had to move to another wing, but it was a pleasant hassle because the department was transforming before our eyes, and almost every day delivered boxes to the warehouse with domestic and imported equipment, the highest quality, the most modern. The renovation was over quickly. Ethan was once again convinced that money solves everything, or almost everything. After the work the department shone with white walls and ceilings, unpleasant odors of mustiness and dampness disappeared. Even being here became more pleasant. And the equipment? Ethan couldn't get enough of the new medical equipment. It was a whole new thing. Now they would be able to turn around. Now the patients would recover faster and easier. The man was heartily grateful to the mysterious sponsor. He wanted to talk to him personally, but the man preferred to remain anonymous. The rich have their own quirks, divorced the chief physician. Our benefactor is in disguise, but what are his reasons? Maybe he sinned a lot while he was building up his capital, and now he's making amends. What do we care about that? We care about the result. Ethan could not agree with the words of the chief. He wanted to thank the sponsor personally, to explain how many lives he had saved by his deed, but the patron of the arts did not want to reveal his identity. Well, his right, of course, but it all seemed very strange to Ethan. At work, the man's soul rested. Fresh repairs, new equipment, all this inspired, lifted his spirits, but at home things were not going so well as he would have liked. Moneyless, not that they were poor at all, Ethan's salary even allowed Margaret not to work. They both made that choice when their daughter was born. His wife would stay at home and take care of the children, and he, the head of the family, would be the sole provider. Margaret honestly fulfilled her duties. The children studied on excellent. The house was always clean and cozy and smelled delicious food. But the role of a provider didn't work out so well. Ethan tried, took part-time jobs, went out to work off the clock, but there was still not enough money for the kind of life Margaret wanted. No, she didn't demand anything supernatural, but she wanted to give her children a decent education, to vacation at sea at least once a year, to drive a new car, not a rusty and constantly breaking down. Ethan could not provide all this for his family, worried, tried to do something, but it did not work. The option of quitting the hospital was not considered at all. It was his department, his brainchild. Under him it began to flourish, and now, thanks to him, the department became the most modern in the hospital. But Margaret, too, she could understand. Scandals, quarrels, recriminations increased, but Ethan tolerated it. He had nothing to say to his frustrated wife. Mason and Susan grew up. They were no longer babies, but teenagers requiring much more investment, including financial. Mason took an interest in programming, searching for videos on the internet and creating amazing projects with their help. Margaret and Ethan marveled when their son showed them the results of his labor, but they themselves were far from the IT world. He needs to learn. Margaret insisted. He's clearly got a knack for it. He's a real talent. Yeah, good for him. He's a determined kid growing up. Only we parents can kill that talent at the root. What's that? I don't get it, Ethan. The boy must learn. And do you know how much a programming course costs? I just found out we can't afford it. Well, that's too bad, but maybe there's something cheaper. You can't. I called all such institutions in our city, and online schools even looked for. Everywhere the price is about the same, and it is not for us. I'll figure something out. You better try. It's our child's future we're talking about. It's in our hands right now. Imagine the responsibility. Ethan knew Margaret was overreacting. Well, nothing would happen if Mason didn't study at these expensive courses. The boy was doing a lot himself, and he was doing well. And when the time came, he would enter a university, become a student to study to be a professional programmer, and all these circles. Ethan had the feeling that they were nothing more than a way to siphon money from ambitious parents. But the man did not argue with Margaret. She reacted painfully to all financial issues, especially if it also affected the children. One of his colleagues gave Ethan a great idea. It turns out that in their city, there is a free school for young programmers. It is an institution of the state. Graduates receive a certificate giving them permission to work, but to get there, you have to pass entrance tests. It seems to have strong teachers, innovative programs, modern equipment, but they take only the most promising ones. Ethan immediately called the school and signed Mason up for testing. On the appointed day, he took a short leave from work and drove his son to the interview. Mason was worried. The boy really wanted to get on the enrollment list, hoped, made plans. Ethan was encouraging the child. The man was really confident of success. Mason is so enthusiastic. He's been studying a lot. He already knows a few things. Who else to take but him? Mason was tested, told to look at the results in 2 days on the website. After the allotted time, Ethan called Margaret and told her in a distraught voice that their son's name wasn't on the list. She even called the school to find out if there was a mistake. And it was confirmed that Mason had fallen a few points short. They had advised her to study and try to get in next year. Ethan was upset, of course. He thought it was a done deal, but he spoke to his wife in a deliberately cheerful voice. Well, nothing, he's still a young guy. There's time. He'll have time to study. He'll improve his math and English, and then... You don't understand anything. Margaret was indignant. While he's standing here, his peers are moving ahead, and he'll never catch up with them. Do you understand? Never. And you can't pay for a programming course. You're ruining your son's future. After the conversation with Margaret, Ethan walked sad and pensive for a long time. More and more often she reproached him for not earning enough. It was hard to look like such a lowlife in the eyes of his wife, and the children heard it all too. Here Ethan was distracted, the man was at work, and here he is an important and irreplaceable person, and very respected. His opinion and help is needed by someone all the time. No important medical decision is made without him. Ethan went about his usual business, and then, about a week after the incident with the programming school, a strange and very unexpected event happened. Ethan got a call from the school. The administrator informed him as politely as possible that there were a few more budget places on the course, and since Mason had shown high results on the test, he would be enrolled. They asked him to come with documents and fill out some paperwork. Ethan, of course, immediately called his wife back. Margaret was over the moon. The man smiled, imagining how happy Mason himself would be. Some time later, the problem with the salary was solved quite unexpectedly. The city announced a contest for Doctor of the Year. For the first time in my life, it had never happened before. And from the hospital, The head physician nominated Ethan as a contestant. The man tried to resist. He did not like such events, but the chief insisted, saying that the candidate for the head of the pulmonology department, chosen by voting on the hospital's website, patients favored him. They also wrote explanatory comments. Ethan didn't know that there was any voting, but it was very pleasant to read the patients' comments. Once again, the man felt that his work was seen, valued, and appreciated. The most important thing is that during this time they managed to save many lives. No money can measure that, and then the work spun again. Ethan didn't think about the contest. Filled out some form, submitted a photo. Someone from the hospital administration handled the rest. After a while, Ethan was summoned to his office by the head doctor and asked in a mysterious voice if he had a business suit. "Well, I did," Ethan shrugged. "Why?" "Because you're the winner of the contest." The head doctor's eyes were burning. If only such an honor for the hospital. Now it will be easier to get funding from the budget and the long-awaited repair of some departments. I did nothing to win. Ethan, who had forgotten all about the contest, stretched out in confusion. He couldn't believe it was true. You didn't do anything to win the contest, but you did more important things, working, giving of yourself to patients, saving people. That's why you won. At the awards ceremony, Ethan came in glowing Margaret, his wife holding his hand. She looked gorgeous in a dress with an open back, specially purchased for the occasion. Ethan also looked good in the elegant suit he had last worn 5 years ago for the wedding of his wife's younger brother. He was called to the stage. Ethan was a little confused in the spotlight, but as his friends and colleagues told him later, it looked very appropriate, and the Doctor of the Year was not bad at all. It turns out that when you stand on the stage, because of the bright light, you can hardly see the audience hall. It seems dark and boundless sea. Ethan felt the eyes on himself, felt the energy of the audience, but did not see them. Such a strange feeling. And then there was a banquet, at which the tipsy, cheerful head doctor announced important news. It turned out that the winner of the contest would receive a monthly supplement to his salary from the budget, and named such an amount that Margaret shrieked with joy, and Ethan smiled. No longer would he feel like a man who could not provide a decent life for his family. Ethan had often wondered if fate had favored him in some special way lately. He always thought that life was striped. The black stripes would be replaced by white ones, and vice versa. But his phase of success and rise was not over. One success followed another. It certainly pleased, inspired, made him feel strong and almost omnipotent, but also caused a strange feeling. Is everything really working out so well? Was it somehow suspicious in itself? Wouldn't there be a reckoning one day? Ethan tried to chase such thoughts away, but occasionally they still seeped in and kept the man at peace. And now it was completely idyllic at home. The family had finally moved into a new, larger apartment, closer to the gymnasium where the children were studying. The couple even had time to make repairs, but how to do? Ethan simply paid for the services of workers, and while the whole family vacationed at the sea, the team turned the apartment with rough finishing into a stylish, beautiful dwelling. True, we had to constantly communicate with the repairman on Skype, to accept the work, to give instructions, but it was a very pleasant hassle. My wife was delighted, but Mason with some sadness remembered how he liked to make repairs in their old apartment, when they, as a team, painted the walls themselves, glued wallpaper, and then a long time to clean up and remove construction waste. As it turns out, these actions gave the children a special pleasure. Ethan's life had changed a lot. He didn't even notice when it started, but now everything was completely different. He worked in a state-of-the-art department. His son was studying at a prestigious programming school. They now had a spacious new apartment. As for money, of course, they were not millionaires, but now they did not have to save on food, clothes, entertainment, and it was just wonderful. But probably, Ethan thought too often that everything could not be so smooth and good in life, and waited for some kind of payback or black streak. But he didn't believe in this happy fairy tale, where all the problems were solved as if by themselves. That evening, Ethan returned from the hospital late. His shift was over at 6 p.m., but he had to stay late, a complicated patient of uncertain prospects. Ethan couldn't leave him until he knew exactly what was wrong. And now, at almost midnight, he was driving along a half-empty country highway, so it was faster than looping through the city, and the route itself was easier, no traffic lights or crosswalks. I could relax a little, which is very helpful when I was in the hospital for 10 hours in a row. It was raining. The drops were drumming on the roof, smashing beautifully against the windshield. The wipers barely coped with their task. I could hardly wait to get home to warmth and comfort. Surely Margaret must have cooked something delicious. Now he was always greeted by a satisfied, smiling wife, not an irritated woman with anxious eyes. A marvelous metamorphosis. And then there was a noise, a rumble, a squeal of brakes, and a strong, powerful, unexpected blow. It came from the right. Ethan felt that he was losing control. He twisted the steering wheel to the right, but it was inexorably carried to the left into the ditch. The car spun. Everything was happening fast. The man saw the sky and the earth change places before his eyes, making him nauseous. Ethan hit the roof and the side windows of the car, but somehow he felt no pain. He wished this fall and his surroundings would end sooner, to get out on solid ground where there was no jolt. Finally, the car came to a stop. Ethan realized that he was trapped in a crumpled car, which had fallen into a ditch with the roof down. The situation was made worse by the fact that a fire was starting. Ethan first smelled a distinctive odor, and then flames appeared as they quietly flared up in the back of the car, but it didn't take long for the fire to spread throughout the cabin. Ethan was bombarded with a wave of terror. There was a need for action. The man tried to free himself, but it was useless. The belt held tight, the doors were jammed, and his hands were not obeying well for some reason. They're strangely sticky and slippery. It's blood. Where's it coming from? Okay, he'll figure it out later. If there is one, it's later. Ethan tried to break the window with what he could find, his son's plastic tube. Of course, he really realized that he was unlikely to succeed, but something had to be done. At the same time, the man loudly called for help. People should see the accident. They would help him. The cabin was quickly filling with smoke. The fire was gaining strength. The characteristic crackle of the flames of the fire eating its food could be heard. A disheveled boy, very young, came to the car. He bent down, made sure that there was a living person in the cabin, tried to open the jammed door, saw the flames. The boy's eyes rounded with fear, and he bounced away to a safe distance. Ethan realized, frightened, realizing what could happen any minute. The boy called for the rescue team, shouting into the phone, his voice breaking, begging them to go faster, but Ethan realized they wouldn't make it. With little time to spare, the man struggled to free himself. He has a life to live, he has children, a wife, he has a job and patients who can't do without him. It was getting harder and harder to breathe. Ethan realized that it was because of the smoke. Soon he would lose consciousness and probably would not even feel anything, but he would lose the opportunity to fight for life. The men joined in. He managed to spot someone else. Someone ran up to the burning car, smashing the windshield. Ethan felt a hail of small shards smashing his face. Or maybe this was all just a hallucination. Strong hands reached out, for the driver wedged between the seat and the dashboard. Then darkness came, saving, calm, impenetrable. Ethan opened his eyes. He had to squeeze his eyes shut. The white walls, the bright light, all of it blinding, preventing him from looking around properly. There was a distinctive beeping sound. Very familiar, there's no mistaking it. He's in the intensive care ward. Maybe even in his own hospital, but in a different ward. Ethan remembered that he had been in an accident, in a burning car, his seat pressed firmly against the dashboard. There was almost no chance of rescue. Did they get him out? Did the rescue team get there in time? Miracles! Then another very important question arose, and what condition was he in? Apparently not in the best condition, since he was in intensive care, and at the same time his head was thinking clearly, which meant that his brain was not particularly damaged. Ethan opened his eyes again. This time he managed to look around. He was alone in the room. Life support equipment was connected to him. He was as he should be without clothes, lying under a thin white sheet. Ethan tried to move his arms, and his legs were working. The man lifted himself slightly and looked under the sheet, his feet bandaged, a few bandages on his body, but everything in place. It looked like things might not be so bad. A familiar nurse entered the room. Ethan had seen her many times in the corridors. They had said hello, but unfortunately he didn't know her name. When the nurse saw that the patient was awake, she smiled happily. "Ethan, are you with us? What a joy! Would you please call James?" Ethan asked, his voice sounding hoarse, somehow weak. He needed to talk to James, the head of the trauma department, and find out about his condition. He felt a little dizzy, a little sore in places, but overall Ethan didn't feel like staying in the ICU. He wanted to go to a regular room. Sure. The nurse nodded and ran for the chief. James arrived promptly, smiling broadly and looking at his colleague, who had been turned into a patient with obvious relief. "Well, what can I say? You were born with your shirt on. You were hit on the highway by an SUV that lost control. The kid behind the wheel was a kid who just got his license yesterday, showing off for his girl. He's fine, but you'll see. All right, he'll get his." Ethan remembered the confused boy who had called the rescue team, begging them to hurry. That must be the one responsible for the accident. For some reason, Ethan didn't feel any anger or even irritation at the character. There was so much fear, despair, remorse in the boy's eyes at that moment. So I was rescued by the rescue team? Did they make it in time? There was a car on fire, not a lifeguard. Rescuer, your guardian angel. A young man was driving down the road, saw the accident. He pulled you right out of the burning car, even though he realized that any minute now something terrible could happen. He didn't hesitate, broke the glass with a fire extinguisher, knocked down the flames a little, freed you from the seat belts with a knife, unfastened the metal with his hands. Just a little bit, but it was enough to pull you out. Your legs were scratched, but it's nothing. And the main thing was not confused and took the fire extinguisher and the knife when he rushed to the rescue. "I want to see him," Ethan said. "That man. He saved my life at the risk of his own." "Yes, he'll come again," James promised. "He's sure to, because he calls every day to check on your condition, as often as your relatives do." "Every day? How long have I been unconscious?" "Yeah, almost a week. We were afraid you'd slip into a coma. Sometimes it's hard to know how much brain damage there is, and you were still swollen, but luckily it was okay. I went over the edge a few times. Does Margaret know I'm okay? Well, don't be too quick about it. You've got a lot of healing to do. But I called your wife as soon as I was told. She's probably flying all the way down here by now. Ethan had a lot of time to think at the hospital. The man who had saved him was not out of his mind. He knew they were bound to meet someday, but how can you thank someone who did such a thing for you? At the risk of his own life. Soon Ethan was transferred from the intensive care unit to a regular ward, but as a regular ward, to a separate room reserved for VIP patients. The man might have been more than happy to be with the other patients, to have someone to talk to. But James insisted on special conditions for the honored guest. Ethan didn't like being a patient, and the forced idleness was a burden. Probably that was why his recovery was going at a fast pace. The doctor wanted to get back to work, to his favorite business. His colleagues visited him, reported news, brought him treats. Margaret and her children appeared almost every day. The family realized that Ethan might not have died that night. There was even more chance of that than of being saved. The accident gave the relationship a special shade, united the spouses. In Margaret's eyes there was more love, tenderness, and it was pleasant, very pleasant. The mysterious savior did not appear. Ethan tried to find out about him from the policeman who came to take statements, asked his colleagues who had received him that fateful night, and even asked questions of the man who had caused the accident, the same kid who had come to him once to apologize. Shy, modest, nervous, with a weight of guilt on his fragile shoulders, but even this one could not say anything about the Savior, except that he drove up in an Infiniti and acted very quickly and decisively. He didn't just save you, he saved me. Without looking Ethan in the eye, the boy said, "If something had happened to you, something irreparable, I don't know how I would have lived with it. So if you see him, give him a big thank you from me." One day, the mysterious benefactor showed up on his own. James himself came by to warn Ethan. "Well, get ready. Here comes our hero." For some reason, he said in a whisper to a patient, a colleague, "Will you tell me later what's going on?" James left the room, and after a minute, the door was created, and a young man entered it with a broad step. A wide, white-toothed smile on his face, intelligent eyes, slightly wavy blonde hair, stylish, trim, some kind of radiant or what. Judging by his springy gait and muscles, visible even under his shirt, he is engaged in some kind of sport. That's why he managed to pull the victim out of the burning car. Moments later, Ethan noticed a detail that struck him to the core. The rescuer was holding a box of candy, his favorite. Once Ethan used to adore these sweets, but then the candy seems to have been discontinued. At least they had disappeared from the market. Where did this man find the box? And most importantly, how does he know that Ethan adores them and misses his favorite treat? It's just too weird to be a coincidence. "Hello." The visitor smiled, friendly and very, very warmly. "Afternoon." Ethan eyed his savior, someone he reminded him of. Perhaps they had met before. It's quite possible. You know who I am? Of course, you're the one who saved my life." "Yes, I did. Whether it was an accident or not, who knows? But it was you who saved my life. You did it first." "What?" Ethan was trying to remember where he'd seen this man before. "I don't understand." "You don't remember?" The young man concluded and smiled. "That's not surprising. The last time I saw you was when I was just a kid. Daniel?" Ethan suddenly realized. How could he not have realized? The eyes, the hair, the intonation. Of course. "Daniel, is that really you?" "Yeah. Remember I promised I'd save you someday. You see, I kept my word. Tell me, what happened to you then after you were discharged?" Ethan asked, He was really interested in the fate of this orphanage boy, whom he had once seriously thought of taking into the family to bring up as a son. It turned out that Daniel was accepted to study at the very design center, where Ethan went to bother about him. Here, the boy's talent was immediately noticed and appreciated. With him engaged in the best teachers, his work was sent to all sorts of competitions, where they steadily took prizes. Daniel gained a certain popularity. Thanks to this, he was somehow respected in the orphanage. By the end of school, Daniel received several offers from the best architectural universities in the country. These institutions provided him with a dormitory and a scholarship just to get the coveted student. Daniel chose New York. Teachers from the Design Center, which had time for years of study to become a boy, almost native, said that there he has a better chance of success, and so it turned out. While still a student, Daniel became an employee of one of the largest architectural firms in the country. He started earning so much that within a year, he was able to save up for his own apartment, and then more. Daniel graduated from university and became the head of his department. His life changed completely. Money, expensive things, trips to expensive resorts. Daniel did not deny himself anything, and it was just wonderful. But most importantly, the guy was doing what he loved, what he really did well. Daniel enjoyed both the work and the result and felt really happy. Daniel never for a moment forgot about the person who first showed him concern. He knew perfectly well that Ethan had saved him twice, the first time on the night of admission, when he had refused to leave the bedside of a heavy patient and had noticed a seizure in time. The second time, the man had spent all his savings on medication for the orphaned orphan. Without expensive medication, Daniel would not have made it. The guy was clearly aware of this, but the doctor did not limit himself to the fulfillment of his official duties. He not only cured Daniel, not only gave him life, Ethan also believed in Daniel's talent and helped this gift to develop. Daniel still kept the construction kit he received from Ethan that Christmas. It was thanks to this set that the kid realized that architecture was really his calling. He spent hours and hours building amazing buildings, some of which he realized as an adult. I'm so happy for you, I really am. Ethan smiled. He looked at the young, confident man and couldn't believe it was Daniel, the same skinny teenager, abandoned, betrayed twice, wanted by no one. Joy and pride for Daniel, that's what Ethan felt as he looked at this man. Wow, he became such a successful architect, but most importantly, Daniel grew up kind, brave, determined, ready to help others. I always remembered about you and about my promise to help you, followed your fate. It seemed unfair to me that such a good man, a wonderful doctor, saving lives every day, lived like that. Daniel hesitated, afraid of offending his interlocutor, but Ethan smiled and finished the sentence. Lives in poverty. Well, almost. Wait, are you the mysterious sponsor who renovated my department? Nodded Daniel. I was literally pulled out of the grave in this ward once, and I wanted to thank you, especially since I have such an opportunity. It's my pleasure, really. Wow, I never would have guessed. Oh, and this Doctor of the Year contest, is that you too? Well, it's a state contest. I didn't invent it. And yet somehow you're involved in it. I can feel it. You've always had a very good intuition. Daniel smiled. Well, let's just say that I helped to get the contest organized in your town, and I asked the chief physician to nominate you. He said he was going to do it anyway, but I had nothing to do with you winning. I just gave my vote, the only one. The patients chose it themselves. I had no doubt it would work out that way. You are a wonderful doctor, humane, kind, not indifferent. This result is well deserved. Wait, what about Mason, my son? I mean, the programming school, did you have a hand in that too? Ethan was struck by a new hunch. I did my best there, I'll admit. Quid pro quo. You helped me get a job at the design center, and that gave me my way in life, and I also helped your wonderful son. He's a smart kid, just a couple points short of the competition. I paid for all the years of tuition and asked him to tell you that there were budget places available. Ethan looked at the young man in surprise and remembered him as a small boy, thin, big-eyed, pale, almost merging with the hospital bedclothes in color. Now he was a strong, healthy man, successful, brave, kind. But why did he act so secretive? Why didn't he contact me himself directly? Well, Daniel hesitated. It's just that I know you very well. It would be awkward for you to accept this help. Maybe you'd approve a sponsorship for the department, but for yourself, I doubt it. Ethan thought for a moment. Daniel was right. He would probably be genuinely happy for his former patient, but he would probably refuse to help. The doctor was used to helping himself, but he'd never learned to accept support. And then there was that incident, the terrible one with you, the accident, and this time. This time it really was a coincidence. Amazing, marvelous, just unbelievable. At the same time as Ethan was coming home from the hospital, Daniel was driving to visit, quite by chance, an orphanage friend. He had just flown from the capital to his hometown and was rolling down a country highway. The accident happened before his eyes. The SUV lost control and literally swept a light sedan into the ditch. Daniel slowly pressed the brake. His car smoothly slowed down. The young architect watched in horror as the damaged car flew downward, flipping over the roof. While I parked, while I grabbed the necessary things, while I ran to the place, there was a fire starting. It was impossible to slow down. The driver of the SUV tried to help, but he was having no luck. He called for rescuers, only they wouldn't make it in time. Daniel struggled to pull Ethan out. He was already unconscious. At that moment, the guy didn't recognize his old friend and savior. The victim's face was covered with blood, but then when the victim of the accident was already taken away, the police came to the scene. It turned out that in the glove compartment of the half-burned car, there were documents in the name of Ethan. I just couldn't believe it. Daniel shared his impressions. It turns out that I really saved you, as I promised years ago. I still thank fate that I was driving behind you at that moment. It's an amazing coincidence. I've been following your fate for several years. I've been by your side. I've secretly helped you in any way I could, and it always seemed like it wasn't enough, and then this. If it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't be here. Ethan nodded. He was reliving the horror of the accident again, the horrible images coming before his eyes one after another, and once again Ethan realized how close he had been to death. It was an amazing feeling. Now the man appreciated every moment of life even more. And again Daniel continued, "If you hadn't saved me then, many years ago, if you hadn't sat by the bedside of the orphanage patient at night, if you hadn't spent all your money on expensive medicine, if you hadn't, after all, bothered with this design center, then you wouldn't have been gone at night either." Amazing paradox of fate. A life for a life, it turns out. Ethan and Daniel talked for hours on end. The doctor was interested in learning as much as he could about the life of his longtime patient and now savior. The guy lived in the capital 4 years ago. He and his wife had a daughter, and then they took twins, a boy and a girl, from an orphanage. In general, the couple helped orphanages and boarding schools a lot, both financially and as volunteers. I remembered what you told me then. Daniel smiled. That time before you were discharged. What do you mean? Ethan shared, but he couldn't remember his admonition. You asked me to grow up healthy, to become a successful person, and to help those who need help. See, I'm good at that. Yeah, you sure are. It turns out that Daniel then fell into the heart of the doctor's words, and his whole life he built, trying to follow this instruction. A complete stranger turned out to be kind and attentive to Daniel. The boy didn't know that such a thing could happen, but he liked it. He liked it very much. He realized that there are good people in the world, and since then, he dreamed of growing up and becoming strong, to be able to support those who are weaker. I remembered you all the time, remembered our conversations, your care. I knew exactly who I owed my success to. But that's where you're wrong. I just noticed your talent and showed your drawings to whoever needed them, nothing more. But you did it, Daniel insisted. Everyone in the hospital and the orphanage saw my drawings, but you were the only one who decided that this talent was worthy of attention. Daniel left, but it was clear that now they would communicate, go sometimes to visit each other, correspond. There was some kind of connection between them, an invisible thread. Is it a joke to save each other's lives at different stages of life? You can't think of such a thing on purpose. Ethan felt warm and calm. He hadn't felt so peaceful and happy for a long time.